She was left alone in the middle of a burning desert, sick, weak, and without hope. But something happened that no one could have predicted. A powerful man crossed her path, and from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. This is not just a story about betrayal, survival, or love. It's a journey that will challenge everything you believe about fate. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this reading. The desert sun scorched the earth as if it were being judged by the gods themselves. In the midst of this unforgiving landscape lay Alenya, her slender form trembling with fever upon the burning sand. Her damp skin and parched lips told the tale of a woman fighting for her life. The thin cloths and meager blanket beneath her offered no protection from either the wind or the crushing weight of abandonment. Just moments before, she had gazed into the eyes of her husband, Count Thorian, and heard his smooth lie, "I will return with help." But she knew, even in her delirium, that he would not. The woman who had once been the most beautiful in all of Raventhal was now merely an obstacle to the ambitious plans of the man who had sworn to protect her. Miles away, Thorian rode with satisfaction, pleased with the decision he had made under cover of darkness when he had discreetly released a golden scorpion near his sleeping wife. With the inevitable sting and resulting fever, his excuse was perfectly crafted. She died, and there was nothing to be done. Now he could unite with the foreign princess and claim the throne of Elvria, where bloodlines meant more than honor. Yet what he hadn't accounted for was the improbable, the watchful eye of a king in disguise, silently crossing the same desolate stretch. The sands were about to reveal a destiny that no power could prevent. Hours passed as Alenya's consciousness faded in and out. The sun above showed no mercy, baking the already parched earth. Her elegant hands, once adorned with jewels befitting her station as a countess, now clutched weakly at the sand beneath her. Dreams and reality blurred together as memories of happier times mingled with the bitter present. How had her marriage to Thorian descended into this betrayal? She had noticed his changing demeanor in recent months, the coldness in his eyes, the hushed conversations that ceased whenever she entered the room. But never had she imagined he would leave her to die. "Water," she whispered to no one, her throat so dry the word barely escaped her lips. The vultures had already begun to circle overhead, patient witnesses to human cruelty. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the dunes, a solitary rider appeared on the horizon, his cape billowing in the hot wind. King Cale rode alone, disguised in simple traveler's clothes, seeking answers that couldn't be found within the golden halls of his palace. At 40 years old, his weathered face carried both the wisdom of leadership and the sorrow of personal loss. For years he had ruled Vernaris with justice and strength, but today he was just a man seeking solitude in the vast emptiness of the desert. When he spotted a feminine silhouette collapsed upon the sand, he first doubted his eyes, thinking it a mirage. But as he drew closer, the vision didn't waver. His heart raced as he dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, rushing to the fallen figure. Kyle knelt beside Alenya, gently turning her over. Despite the grime and sweat coating her face, he could see she was strikingly beautiful, with high cheekbones and delicate features. Her eyes fluttered open momentarily, eyes of startling clarity despite her condition, meeting his with a silent plea. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, checking her pulse. It was faint, but present. As his experienced hands examined her for injuries, he found the angry red welt on her arm, the unmistakable mark of a scorpion sting, one of the deadliest kinds. Alenya tried to speak, but only managed a weak moan. Cale's mind raced through his options. The nearest village was at least a day's ride away, and she wouldn't survive that long without treatment. There was only one chance, the reclusive healer Idrin, who lived among the southern cliffs. The journey would be perilous, especially with the woman's fragile condition, but there was no alternative. "Hold on," Cale said with determination, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I won't let you die here." With gentle strength he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her once healthy frame now diminished by dehydration and illness. Her head fell naturally against his chest as if seeking his heartbeat. the only steady thing in her crumbling world. As Kyle carefully mounted his horse with Elenya secured against him, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a protective instinct that went beyond duty. There was something about this woman, abandoned in the cruelest manner, that stirred emotions long dormant within him. "Stay with me," he murmured as he urged his horse forward. "Just stay with me." The desert wind carried his words away as they rode south, two strangers bound by fate and the unforgiving landscape that had both condemned and saved her. Behind them, the setting sun painted the sky in hues of fire and blood, a fitting backdrop to the drama unfolding across the sand. And somewhere in the distance, Count Thorian continued his journey, unaware that his perfect crime had just been undone by the most powerful man in the kingdom. The king held Elenya closer as her body shivered against him. He knew the venom was spreading. Every moment counted now. As his horse galloped across the endless dunes, Kale made a silent vow. Whoever had left this woman to die would face justice, but first he would save her life, no matter the cost to himself. Kyle clutched Elenya's limp body against his chest as he mounted his steed once more, the urgency of her condition driving him forward. The gold and crimson sunset gave way to a night sky ablaze with stars, but the king had no time to admire their beauty. His every sense was focused on the faint heartbeat of the woman in his arms, each rhythm growing weaker with every passing hour. The venom of the golden scorpion was among the most lethal in the realm. Few survived its poison without immediate treatment. "Hold on," he whispered against her hair, damp with fever sweat. "We must reach Idrin before dawn." The ancient healer, hidden away in the rocky cliffs of Argot, was Kale's only hope. The king pushed his stallion to its limits, navigating treacherous dunes by moonlight, the beast's powerful muscles straining beneath them. Every jolt caused Elenya to whimper in pain, though her eyes remained closed. "Just a little longer," Kyle promised, his voice a low rumble against the desert wind. "Stay with me." Her fingertips, once warm and delicate, had grown cold against his arm. Kale felt dread crawling up his spine. The chill of death was setting in. The next water source was still hours away, and without hydration, her chances diminished with every heartbeat. Near midnight, the king spotted a small outcropping of rocks that provided minimal shelter from the biting wind. He needed to bring down her fever, even if just for a moment. Dismounting carefully, he carried Elenya into the shallow cave and laid her upon his cloak. "Can you hear me?" he asked, gently patting her cheek. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing glazed eyes that struggled to focus. "Am I dying?" Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry. "Not if I have any say in it," Kyle answered firmly, uncorking his water skin. He lifted her head tenderly, pressing the opening to her parched lips. "Drink." Slowly. Elenya managed a few sips before coughing weakly. In the dim light, Kyle examined the sting on her arm. The skin around it had turned an angry purple with dark tendrils spreading outward. Time was running out. From his saddlebag, he retrieved a small jar of honey and a clean cloth. His mother, a wise woman from the northern provinces, had taught him basic healing arts long before he inherited the crown. Though he commanded royal physicians now, those early lessons remained ingrained in his mind. "This may hurt," he warned, dabbing honey directly onto the wound. Elenya gasped, her back arching in pain. "Why?" she murmured, her gaze finally finding his face in the darkness. "Why help a stranger?" Kale paused, studying her features. Even ravaged by illness, there was a nobility to her countenance, a gentle strength that touched something within him. "Perhaps you remind me of someone," he answered, his voice softer than intended. "Or perhaps I couldn't bear to see such cruelty go unanswered." Her lips curved into the faintest smile before her eyes rolled back, consciousness slipping away once more. Kyle worked quickly, wrapping her wound with the cloth, hoping the honey would draw out some of the poison. It was a temporary measure at best, but perhaps enough to keep her alive until they reached Idrin. As he tended to her, Elenya's delirious murmurs painted fragments of a disturbing story, words of betrayal, of cold eyes watching her suffer, of a scorpion deliberately placed. Kale's jaw tightened with each revelation. Someone had wanted this woman dead, had orchestrated her suffering with calculated precision. "Thorian," she whispered at one point, tears leaking from her closed eyes. "Why? Was I not enough?" The name struck Kyle like a physical blow. Count Thorian of Raventhal, a man known for his ambition and wealth, whose lands bordered the eastern edge of Kale's kingdom. If this woman was connected to him. "Rest now," Kale said, wiping her tears with his thumb. "You're safe." After allowing his horse a brief respite, they continued their desperate journey through the night. Kale held Elenya closer as her shivers intensified, her body fighting the venom that threatened to claim her. The king hadn't prayed in years, not since losing his beloved queen to childbirth fever, but now he found himself whispering ancient words to the stars above. By dawn's first light they reached the foothills of the Argat Mountains. Elenya's breathing had grown shallow, her skin taking on an ashen hue that terrified Kale more than any battlefield he'd ever faced. "Stay with me," he commanded, no longer requesting but ordering, as if his royal authority could keep death at bay. "We're almost there." Meanwhile, in the lavish halls of his estate, Count Thorian raised a goblet of wine in private celebration. The deed was done. His beautiful but inconvenient wife was surely dead by now, her body becoming one with the merciless desert. The path to Princess Helvia's hand, and the throne of Elvria, lay open before him. His revelry was interrupted by a sharp knock. His steward entered, face pale with urgency. "My lord, a rider brings news from the southern route." Thorian's smile faltered. "What news?" "A traveler was seen rescuing a woman from the desert yesterday, a woman matching the Countess's description." The goblet slipped from Thorian's fingers, shattering against the marble floor, red wine spreading like blood across white stone. "Who?" he demanded, voice strangled. "Who dared interfere?" The steward hesitated. "The description matches no ordinary traveler, my lord." The rider spoke of a man with regal bearing, traveling without banner or escort. "Some whisper it might be King Kale," Thorian finished, ice replacing the blood in his veins. If the king of Vernaris had found Elenya, if she survived to tell her tale, his dreams of power would crumble to dust, replaced by charges of attempted murder and treason. "Find them," he ordered, fist slamming against the table. "Send our best men. She cannot reach civilization alive. Whatever the cost, whatever must be done, stop them." As gold exchanged hands and mercenaries mounted their steeds, Thorian paced his chambers like a caged animal. Everything hinged on silencing Elenya permanently. The king was a complication, but one that could be managed. An unfortunate accident in the perilous desert, perhaps. No one would question too deeply if both bodies were found, ravaged by the elements and predators. Back in the desert, Kale finally spotted the stone dwelling nestled within a rocky alcove, Idrin's home. The ancient healer had served 3 generations of Vernaris royalty before retreating to solitude decades ago. Few knew of his existence anymore, and fewer still could find him. "Idrin!" Kyle shouted as he approached, his voice echoing against the cliffs. "In the name of Vernaris, I require your aid." The weathered door swung open, revealing a man whose age seemed impossible to determine. Wrinkled and bent, yet with eyes sharp as a hawk's, Idrin took in the scene before him, the king without his crown, carrying a dying woman in his arms. "Bring her inside," he said without preamble, turning back into the dimly lit dwelling. The interior smelled of herbs and minerals, walls lined with shelves of strange ingredients. Kale gently laid Elenya on a simple cot, reluctant to release her even now. Idrin examined the wound, his expression growing grave. "Golden scorpion. The venom has spread far. Most would be dead by now. But she can be saved?" Kale asked, tension lacing every word. The healer's ancient eyes studied the king's face with uncomfortable perception. "You care deeply for this stranger. Interesting. Can you save her?" Kale repeated, ignoring the observation. "Perhaps, but the treatment is painful, and success is not guaranteed." Idrin reached for various bottles and powders. "She will scream. She will beg for death. Are you prepared to witness that, Your Majesty? Kyle's gaze returned to Alenya's face, peaceful in unconsciousness, but marked by suffering. Something about her had awakened a protective instinct he thought long buried with his wife. Whether it was her vulnerability or the injustice done to her, he could not abandon her now. I will stay, he declared, whatever comes. As Idrin began preparing his remedies, grinding herbs with practiced efficiency, Kale took Alenya's cold hand in his, a silent promise passing between them. Outside, the desert wind howled against the stone walls, carrying with it the distant sound of hoofbeats, hunters drawing ever closer to their prey. 3 days passed like a fevered dream within Idrin's stone sanctuary. Alenya's battle against the scorpion's venom waged beneath her skin, a war fought with screams that echoed against the ancient walls. As the healer had warned, the treatment proved brutal. Kale remained steadfast through it all, wiping her brow, holding her thrashing limbs when necessary, and whispering reassurances when her delirium gave way to moments of panicked clarity. On the dawn of the 4th day, silence finally settled over the dwelling. Kyle, exhausted from his vigilance, had dozed off in a wooden chair beside her cot. He awakened to the sensation of being watched. Opening his eyes, he found Alenya's gaze upon him, clear and focused for the first time since he'd found her abandoned in the sands. You're still here, she said, her voice raspy but steady. The fever flush had receded from her cheeks, leaving behind a delicate pallor that spoke of her ordeal. Kale straightened, muscles protesting after days of minimal rest. I promised I would be. Her lips curved into a fragile smile. I heard you. Through the pain, through the darkness, your voice was an anchor. She attempted to sit up, wincing at the effort. Kale moved immediately to assist her, his hands gentle yet firm beneath her shoulders. The healer says you're extraordinarily strong, he offered, arranging pillows behind her back. Few survive the golden scorpion's bite, even with treatment. Alenya studied him with newfound clarity, taking in his weathered features, the subtle lines around his eyes that spoke of responsibilities beyond his 40 years. Though dressed in simple traveler's garb, there was an undeniable nobility in his bearing that she'd been too ill to notice before. You know my name, she stated rather than asked. I heard you use it during my fever, yet I don't know yours. Kale hesitated, accustomed to everyone knowing his identity on sight. The anonymity felt strangely liberating. For now, just call me Kale. Kale, she repeated softly, testing the name on her tongue. You risked much to save a stranger. Perhaps it was fate that brought me across your path. He poured water from a clay pitcher into a cup and offered it to her. You were not meant to die in that desert. As she drank, Alenya's gaze never left his face. No, I was meant to die, just not by your hand. The cup trembled slightly in her grasp. He left me there to perish. My husband. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications. Kale's jaw tightened, confirming his suspicions about the fragments she'd revealed during her delirium. Count Thorian, he stated, watching her eyes widen in surprise. You know of him? I know of many nobles in these lands. Kale's response was deliberately vague. Your fever brought forth many truths. You spoke of treachery, of a scorpion deliberately placed. Alenya looked down at her bandaged arm, memories flooding back with terrible clarity. The night before he abandoned me, I awoke briefly to see him kneeling near my bedroll. I thought... Her voice faltered. I thought he was checking on me, perhaps concerned for my comfort. How naive I was. Why would he want you dead? Kyle asked, his voice gentle despite the harshness of the question. She met his gaze with surprising steadiness. For weeks there have been whispers of an alliance through marriage with Princess Helvia of Elvria, a union that could eventually place him on a throne. Her fingers twisted the rough blanket covering her lap. But such an arrangement would require him to be a widower, not a married man. So he chose power over honor, Kyle concluded, unable to keep the disgust from his voice. Over love, Alenya corrected softly, though I suspect he never truly loved me at all. Our marriage was arranged when I was but a girl of 17, My family's lands bordered his, making the union advantageous. A shadow crossed her face. 21 years I gave him, and in return he gave me to the desert. Cale fought to control his rising anger at the injustice of her situation. In his kingdom, such treachery would be punishable by death. The fact that Thorian had nearly succeeded in his plot against this woman stirred something protective and primal within him. "You're safe now," he assured her, his hand moving instinctively to cover hers. The touch was brief but sent an unexpected warmth through his palm. "When you've regained sufficient strength, I'll see you safely to wherever you wish to go." Elenia's expression clouded. "I have nowhere to go. My husband believes me dead." To return would mean facing him, and he would only try again, perhaps more directly next time. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And who would believe a wife's accusations against a powerful count? Before Cale could respond, Idren entered the room, his ancient eyes assessing his patient with practiced efficiency. The healer carried a steaming bowl of broth that filled the room with the scent of herbs and bone marrow. "Eat," he commanded, placing the bowl on a small table beside her. "The poison leaves the body slowly. Food will hasten the process." As Elenia obediently reached for the bowl, Idren turned to Cale with a meaningful look. "A word outside, if you please." The two men stepped into the harsh sunlight, moving several paces from the dwelling before the healer spoke again. "There are riders searching the foothills," Idren stated without preamble. 6 men, heavily armed, asking questions of the goat herds. They seek a woman and her rescuer. Kyle's hand instinctively moved to the sword at his hip. "How far?" "A half-day's ride, perhaps less." The old man's gaze swept across the horizon. "They bear no standard, but their purses are heavy with Raventhal gold." "Mercenaries," Cale muttered. Thorian moves quickly to cover his tracks. "Indeed." Idren studied the king's face. "You've grown attached to her." It wasn't a question, and Kyle didn't bother denying it. "She deserves justice." "Justice is a luxury few women ever receive, Your Majesty." Idren's use of the royal address was deliberately pointed, especially against men of influence. "Not in my kingdom," Kyle replied, his voice hardening with resolve. "Then you must first get her there alive." The healer gestured toward the rocky paths winding through the mountains. "Take the high route through Silvar Pass. The way is treacherous, but few know it exists. It will buy you time." Cale nodded, calculating the journey in his mind. "Is she strong enough to travel?" "No," Idren answered bluntly. "But staying here means certain death for you both." The king's decision was immediate. "Prepare whatever medicines she'll need for the journey. We leave before sunset." When Cale returned inside, he found Elenia attempting to stand, using the wall for support. Her legs trembled with the effort, but determination burned in her eyes. "I heard," she said simply. "They're coming for me." "For us," Cale corrected, moving to her side should her strength fail. "Your husband doesn't know who aided you, only that someone did." "Then leave me," she urged, her gaze intense. "I've caused you enough danger already. These men won't hesitate to kill you to reach me." Cale almost smiled at the absurdity of her suggestion. "I didn't carry you through the desert, fight the venom for 3 days at your side, only to abandon you now." "Why?" she demanded, frustration and fear mingling in her voice. "Why risk your life for someone you don't even know?" The question hung between them, demanding an answer that Cale himself wasn't entirely certain of. He'd acted on instinct from the moment he'd found her in the sand, a compulsion that went beyond duty or chivalry. "I know enough," he finally answered, his voice softer than intended. "I know you've endured a betrayal few could survive. I know your spirit fought when your body could not." His gaze held hers steadily. "And I know that your life is worth saving, Elenia of Raventhal." Something shifted in her expression, a vulnerability that transcended physical weakness. For a woman who had been discarded so cruelly, perhaps being seen as worthy was the most powerful medicine of all. "Then I'll not waste your efforts," she conceded, straightening with renewed determination. "Tell me what must be done." As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the rocky terrain, Idren worked efficiently to prepare for their departure. He ground herbs into paste for Alenya's continuing treatment, packed dried provisions, and provided Kale with detailed instructions for navigating the treacherous mountain paths. Meanwhile, in a humble village at the base of the foothills, 6 hard-faced men interrogated a terrified shepherd, the glint of gold making their questions impossible to ignore. "A man and a woman, you say?" The lead mercenary leaned forward on his horse, his scarred face twisted in a mockery of a smile. "And they sought the old healer?" The shepherd nodded fearfully. 3 days passed. The woman seemed near death. "And the man? Describe him." "Tall, strong-built, carried himself like a lord, though his clothes were plain." The shepherd swallowed nervously. "His face, I couldn't see clearly." The mercenary flipped another gold coin, which the shepherd caught reflexively. "And which path leads to this healer?" As the shepherd's trembling finger pointed toward the rocky slopes, the leader signaled his men to mount up. They would reach the stone dwelling by nightfall, complete their task, and return to Count Thorian with proof that his secret was safe once more. None of them suspected that the plain-dressed traveler was the king himself, or what fury such a discovery might unleash. Back at the healer's dwelling, Kale helped Alenya onto his stallion, his hands lingering briefly at her waist to ensure she was steady. Though still weak, she sat straighter than he expected, her determination evident in every line of her body. "The path ahead is dangerous," he warned, mounting behind her. The proximity was intimate, her back pressed against his chest, her scent, now clean of fever sweat, filling his senses. "Hold tight to the saddle horn if your strength fails." "It won't," she replied with quiet dignity, though both knew it was more wish than certainty. Idrin approached, pressing a small leather pouch into Kale's hand. "For pain, for fever, for strength when needed. Use sparingly. The effects are powerful, but fleeting." "My thanks, old friend," Kale said earnestly. "Your service will not be forgotten." The ancient healer's eyes crinkled with something approaching amusement. "It is good to see fire in your eyes again. He caught himself, glancing briefly at Alenya. "Kyle, it has been too long." With final instructions and farewells exchanged, they set off toward the setting sun, the narrow mountain path forcing their pace to a careful walk. Behind them, the first hints of torchlight appeared in the valleys below, hunters closing in on prey that had already slipped away. As darkness embraced the mountains, Alenya leaned back slightly against Kale's chest, her exhaustion finally overcoming her pride. He adjusted his arm around her waist, securing her against him. "Rest," he murmured against her hair. "I'll keep watch." In the silence that followed, broken only by the steady rhythm of hoofbeats on stone, Kyle realized with startling clarity that something had awakened within him, something he'd thought forever buried in his queen's tomb years ago. Whether it was merely the thrill of danger or something more profound, he could not yet say. But as Alenya's breathing deepened into sleep, her trust in him absolute despite knowing so little about him, Kale embraced the strange certainty that their fates were now inexorably intertwined. Dawn broke over the jagged peaks of the Silver Pass, painting the stone with hues of amber and gold. Kale guided his mount with expert precision along the narrow path that hugged the mountainside, one arm securely around Alenya's waist. They had traveled through most of the night, stopping only when the darkness made further progress too dangerous. Now, as morning light revealed the dizzying drop to their right, Alenya drew in a sharp breath. "Frightened?" Kyle asked, his voice close to her ear. "Impressed," she corrected, her gaze sweeping across the dramatic landscape. "I've never ventured this far into the mountains. It's beautiful in its harshness." Kyle nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Few travelers know of this pass. My father showed it to me when I was a boy." The memory surfaced unexpectedly. His father, stern but patient, teaching him the secret pathways of his kingdom. He believed a ruler should know every inch of his land. The word ruler slipped out before he could catch it. Alenya tilted her head slightly but made no comment on his choice of words. Instead, she asked, "Your father? Is he still living?" "No," Kyle replied, guiding the horse around a precarious bend. "He's been gone 15 years now." "I'm sorry," she offered simply. After a pause, she added, My father died when I was 16, just before my marriage was arranged. The implication hung between them. How different her life might have been had her father lived to see her married to a man who would eventually try to kill her. Kyle felt a surge of anger at the thought, his arm tightening instinctively around her waist. "Did you have no say in the matter?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Alenia's soft laugh held no humor. "A noblewoman's feelings are rarely considered when land and alliances are at stake. My mother assured me I would grow to love him." Her voice dropped lower. "And for a time I believed I did, or perhaps I merely convinced myself it was love, as women often must." The path widened slightly as they rounded another bend, allowing Cale to bring the horse to a stop beside a small spring that trickled from the rock face. "We should rest here, water the horse and refresh ourselves." He dismounted first, then reached up to help Alenia down. Her strength had improved since they'd left Idrin's dwelling, but she still swayed slightly as her feet touched the ground. Kyle's hands remained at her waist until he was certain she was steady. "Thank you," she murmured, painfully aware of how close they stood. The morning light carved his features into sharp relief, the strong line of his jaw, the weathered skin around his eyes that crinkled when he smiled. There was something familiar about him that she couldn't place, like a painting she had seen once but couldn't recall where. Cale stepped back, breaking the moment. "Are you in pain?" Idrin provided medicines. "It's manageable," Alenia replied, flexing her injured arm carefully. The angry red of the sting had faded to a dull purple, the skin around it still tender but no longer inflamed. The healer worked miracles. While Kyle tended to the horse, Alenia knelt by the spring, cupping her hands to drink the crystal-clear water. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow-cheeked, hair tangled from the journey, yet somehow more alive than she'd felt in years. Survival had awakened something within her that her comfortable but cold marriage had long suppressed. "We should reach safer territory by nightfall," Kyle said, joining her by the spring. "From there, we can decide our next course of action." "Our?" she questioned softly. "Surely your obligation ends once I'm safely away from my husband's men." Cale frowned, gathering his thoughts before responding. "Where would you go, Alenia? As you said yourself, you have nowhere to turn." She looked away, the reality of her situation washing over her anew. "I hadn't thought beyond surviving. Perhaps a convent would take me in." "A convent?" The disbelief in his voice made her turn back to him. "You would bury yourself away after fighting so hard to live?" Alenia's eyes flashed with sudden fire. "What choice does a woman in my position have? I am legally bound to a man who tried to murder me. I have no property of my own, no family willing to defy account for my sake." The bitterness in her voice cut like a blade. "The world offers few options to women who have outlived their usefulness to men." Her words struck Cale with uncomfortable force. As king, he prided himself on just rule, yet how many women in his own kingdom faced similar constraints? How many injustices occurred beneath his notice, sanctioned by law and custom? "You have more choices than you realize," he said finally. "In Vernaris—" A distant sound interrupted him, the faint echo of falling rocks. Kyle's hand moved instantly to his sword, his body tensing as he scanned the cliffs above them. "What is it?" Alenia whispered, reading the sudden alertness in his posture. "We're being followed," he replied, voice low. "Gather only what you need. We must move, now." With practiced efficiency, Kyle secured their meager provisions and helped Alenia mount. The horse, sensing its rider's urgency, pranced nervously as Cale swung up behind her. Instead of continuing along the main path, he guided the animal toward what appeared to be a solid rock face. "Trust me," he murmured as Alenia shot him a questioning glance. As they drew closer, a narrow fissure became visible, barely wide enough for horse and riders to pass single file. The shadows swallowed them as they entered, the temperature dropping noticeably within the confined space. "This leads to a series of caves," Kyle explained, his voice hushed. "We can lose them in the labyrinth within." "How do you know of such places?" Alenia asked, the question that had been building since they'd met finally breaking free. "Who are you really, Kyle?" The darkness concealed his expression, perhaps mercifully. Someone who knows these mountains better than those hunting us. The passage eventually opened into a cavernous space, light filtering through cracks in the ceiling high above. Ancient stalactites hung like stone teeth, water dripping steadily to form pools on the cavern floor. The horse's hooves echoed eerily as Cale guided it toward one such pool. "We'll rest here briefly," he decided, helping Elenya dismount. "The water is safe to drink, and our pursuers will need time to find the entrance, if they discover it at all." As Elenya sank gratefully onto a smooth boulder, Kyle busied himself laying false tracks leading away from their actual path, an old hunter's trick his father had taught him. When he returned, he found Elenya watching him with open curiosity. "You move like a man accustomed to command," she observed. "Your speech, your bearing, they speak of nobility. Yet you travel alone through dangerous territory." Cale met her gaze steadily. "Sometimes solitude offers clarity that court life cannot." "Court life," she repeated, a knowing smile touching her lips. "So you admit you're a nobleman." "I admit I'm a man with responsibilities," he countered, settling beside her on the stone. "Responsibilities I set aside when I found you in the desert." Elenya's expression softened. "And I've done nothing but add to your burden since." "Not a burden," he corrected quickly. "A choice." The silence that followed felt weighted with unspoken questions. In the dim light of the cavern, Elenya studied the man beside her. This stranger who had become her protector, who risked his life for a woman he didn't know. There was an intensity to him that both comforted and unsettled her. "Tell me of your home," she requested softly. "The place you left behind." Cale hesitated, measuring how much to reveal. "It's a place of green valleys and flowing rivers," he began carefully. "Stone walls that have stood for generations. My father's father's father helped build them." "You love it," she observed. It wasn't a question. "With every fiber of my being." The conviction in his voice was unmistakable. "It's not just land. It's the people, the traditions, the sense of belonging to something greater than oneself." Elenya's eyes grew distant. "I've never felt that. My father's lands passed to my husband upon our marriage. Raventhal became my home, but it never truly felt like mine." Her fingers traced idle patterns on the damp stone. 21 years, and I remained a guest in my own house. "That will change," Kyle promised impulsively. "When this is over." A distant echo interrupted him, the unmistakable sound of voices. Kyle rose immediately, hand on his sword hilt. They found the passage. "We must move." Quickly gathering their belongings, they mounted once more and proceeded deeper into the cavern system. The path forked multiple times, and Cale made decisions without hesitation, navigating the underground maze with surprising confidence. "How can you be certain of the way?" Elenya asked as they passed through a particularly narrow tunnel, ducking to avoid low-hanging rock formations. "I told you my father showed me these mountains," Cale replied. "What I didn't mention was that we spent weeks exploring these caves. It became something of an obsession for him, mapping the underground passages that connected different parts of the kingdom." "Your father sounds like an unusual nobleman." Cale's soft laugh reverberated against the stone walls. "He believed that to rule effectively, one must understand the secrets of one's domain." The word rule hung between them for a moment before Elenya spoke again. "These passages, they connect to Vernaris, don't they? That's where you're taking me." "Yes," Kyle admitted, seeing no point in further deception. "To Vernaris, where you'll be beyond Thorian's reach." "You're very confident that your king will offer protection to a foreign noblewoman," Elenya noted, a hint of suspicion in her voice. "Most monarchs prefer not to involve themselves in the domestic affairs of neighboring lords." The passage suddenly widened, opening into another large cavern illuminated by a shaft of sunlight from above. Kyle brought the horse to a stop, dismounting before helping Elenya down. The moment her feet touched the ground, he made a decision. Too many half-truths stood between them. "Elenya," he began, taking her hands in his. "There's something I must tell you." A sudden noise from the tunnel behind them cut his confession short. A rock clattered to the ground, followed by the distinct sound of a sword being drawn from its scabbard. Cale pushed Elenya behind him, drawing his own weapon in one fluid motion. 3 men emerged from the shadows, the lead mercenary's face splitting into a cruel smile when he saw them. "Well, well," he drawled, advancing slowly. "The hunt ends here. Count Thorian sends his regards to his beloved wife." Cale's stance widened, his blade gleaming in the shaft of light. "You'll not touch her." The mercenary's eyes narrowed as he assessed his opponent. 1 man against 3? Those are poor odds, friend. For you, perhaps, Cale replied with deadly calm. What followed happened so quickly that Alenia could barely comprehend it. Cale moved with a speed and precision that spoke of years of training, not the casual swordplay of nobility, but the lethal efficiency of a warrior king. The first mercenary fell before he'd fully raised his weapon. The second backed away with a deep gash across his chest, and the third fled back into the tunnel. When it was over, Cale stood breathing heavily, a shallow cut on his forearm the only evidence that he'd been in danger at all. He turned to Alenia, whose eyes were wide with shock. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. She shook her head, staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. "You fight like no nobleman I've ever seen." Kyle cleaned his blade before sheathing it. "We should move. The one who escaped will bring others." As he helped her mount once more, Alenia placed a hand on his cheek, forcing him to look at her. "No more half-truths, Kyle. When we reach safety, I want the whole of it. Who you are, why you risked everything for me." His expression softened under her touch. "When we reach safety," he agreed, "you'll have your answers." They rode toward an opening at the far end of the cavern, the passage sloping gradually upward toward daylight. Behind them, the echoes of pursuit faded, but both knew the reprieve was temporary. Thorian's men would not give up so easily, not when their master's future depended on silencing Alenia forever. Twilight painted the western sky in shades of crimson and gold as Kyle and Alenia emerged from the mountain passage. Before them stretched a dense forest of ancient pines, their fragrant branches offering both sanctuary and concealment. After the confined spaces of the caves, the open air felt like a blessing, cool and sweet against their skin. "We'll make camp here," Cale decided, guiding his horse deeper into the trees until they reached a small clearing. "The forest will hide us better than any cave, and we both need rest." Alenia didn't argue. The day's journey had drained what little strength she had regained, and the skirmish in the cavern had left her visibly shaken. As Cale helped her dismount, her legs trembled beneath her, forcing him to catch her against his chest. "I'm sorry," she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. "Never apologize for surviving," he responded, his voice gentle yet firm. With careful movements, he helped her settle against the trunk of a massive pine, his cloak cushioning her from the rough bark. While Cale busied himself building a small, nearly smokeless fire from dry pine needles and fallen branches, Alenia watched him with newfound awareness. The way he had fought in the cavern, with such lethal precision and confidence, had stirred questions she could no longer ignore. "In the caves," she began hesitantly, "those men didn't stand a chance against you." Cale glanced up from his work, his expression carefully neutral. "I've had extensive training." "More than extensive," she countered. "You moved like someone who has fought in actual battles, not just training yards." Her eyes searched his face. Few noblemen possess such skill. The fire caught, casting warm light across his features as he settled beside her. "You're very observant." "Necessity breeds observation," she replied. "Living with Thorian taught me to read men carefully. Their moods, their intentions." A shadow crossed her face. Though clearly not carefully enough. Cale reached for their small pack of provisions, offering her a strip of dried meat and a piece of journey bread that Idrin had provided. "You cannot blame yourself for his treachery." "Can't I?" The bitterness in her voice surprised even herself. "I suspected his ambitions were growing. The way he began distancing himself, the secretive meetings, the sudden interest in foreign politics. I knew something had changed." She tore at the bread absently. "But I never imagined he would—" Her voice broke. "Go to such lengths?" Cale finished for her, his tone hardening. "That's because you possess something he clearly lacks. Honor." Alenia looked up at him, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "You speak of honor as if it's an absolute." In my experience, it shifts like sand depending on who holds power. She paused, studying him. But you believe in it genuinely, don't you? I do. Kyle's response was immediate, conviction radiating from the simple words. Without honor, power becomes mere tyranny. Without honor, a man is nothing, regardless of his station. A rare perspective, she noted softly, especially among men who wield influence. Something in her tone made Kale turn to face her fully. You still don't trust me completely. It wasn't a question, but Elenya answered anyway. I trust that you saved my life. I trust that you've protected me at risk to yourself. Her eyes met his steadily. But I don't know why, and that uncertainty haunts me. Kale was silent for a long moment, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower than before. When I found you in the desert, something changed. I can't explain it fully, even to myself. His gaze fell to the flames. For years I've moved through life fulfilling obligations, making decisions based on duty and responsibility. But finding you, that was pure instinct. Instinct, she repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. Yes. He looked up at her again, as if something beyond reason compelled me to act. The intensity in his eyes made Elenya's breath catch. No man had ever looked at her with such unguarded emotion, not even Thorian in the early days of their marriage. And now, she ventured, is it still instinct that drives you to protect me? Kyle's hand moved to cover hers, the touch sending warmth racing up her arm that had nothing to do with the nearby fire. Now it's choice, deliberate and unwavering. The certainty in his voice stirred something within Elenya that she'd thought long dead, a flutter of possibility, of hope. For years, she had been merely a possession, a piece in Thorian's political strategy. But in Kale's eyes, she saw herself reflected as something precious, something worth fighting for. I don't know what awaits me in Vernaris, she admitted, her fingers tentatively turning to intertwine with his, or what future can possibly exist for a woman in my position. A future of your own choosing, Kale promised, whatever that may be. Elenya searched his face, trying to reconcile the mystery that surrounded him. You speak with such confidence, as if you personally could guarantee my safety. A shadow of something, regret, hesitation, passed across Kyle's features. There are things about me, about my position, that I haven't told you. Your position, she repeated carefully. So you do hold some office in Vernaris. Kale nodded slowly. One that would ensure your protection from Thorian. And yet you hesitate to name it, she observed, a note of hurt creeping into her voice despite her efforts to conceal it. After all we've endured together. It isn't lack of trust that stays my tongue, Kyle assured her quickly. It's... He paused, searching for words. From the moment I found you, our interactions have been unlike any in my daily life. There's a freedom in how you see me, as simply a man, not defined by title or responsibility. Elenya considered this, understanding dawning in her eyes. You fear that whatever position you hold would change how I perceive you. Perhaps, he acknowledged. The firelight danced across their faces as silence fell between them. In that moment, titles and stations seemed distant concerns compared to the immediate reality of their connection, this unexpected bond forged through danger and survival. Tell me something true, Elenya requested suddenly. Not about your position or your power, but about yourself, something few people know. Kale's expression softened, grateful for the invitation to share without revealing everything at once. I haven't slept through the night in 7 years. He admitted. Not since my wife died. The confession hung in the air, raw and unadorned. Elenya's breath caught at this glimpse into his private pain. How did she die? She asked gently. Childbed fever, he answered, his voice tight with old grief. She gave her life bringing our son into the world. His jaw clenched. A son who lived only 3 days longer than his mother. Elenya's hand tightened around his. I'm so sorry, Kyle. He nodded, accepting her sympathy with a deep breath. The court physician said everything possible was done, but I've always wondered if I could have found better healers, brought them sooner. His voice trailed off. Hence my determination to reach Idrin when I found you. I wouldn't fail another woman the way I failed her. You didn't fail her, Elenya said firmly. Some battles cannot be won, even by the most devoted husband. Kale looked at her with surprise, unused to being contradicted on a subject so personal. You speak with certainty. I've seen enough of death to know its capriciousness, she explained. My mother, my sister, countless women in our province. Childbed fever takes whom it will, regardless of wealth or station. Her matter-of-fact acceptance of this reality, free from platitudes or empty reassurances, touched Kale deeply. 7 years of carrying this burden, and no one had simply acknowledged the harsh truth that sometimes no amount of power or resources could change fate. Thank you, he said simply. Elenya tilted her head slightly. For what? For seeing me, he replied, the words carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. Not the role I play, but the man beneath it. Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening beyond gratitude or circumstantial dependency. Elenya leaned forward slightly, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. Kale remained still, his eyes never leaving hers, allowing her to bridge the distance between them at her own pace. When her lips touched his, it was gentle, questioning rather than demanding. Kale responded with equal tenderness, one hand rising to cup her cheek with a reverence that made her heart ache. The kiss lasted only moments, yet contained volumes of unspoken emotion. As they drew apart, neither spoke immediately. The crackling fire and distant night sounds of the forest filled the silence, allowing the significance of what had passed between them to settle in their hearts. I've never done that before, Elenya confessed quietly. Kale's brow furrowed in confusion. But you were married for... I've never kissed a man because I wanted to, she clarified, a vulnerability in her voice that made his chest tighten, only because it was expected. The implication of her words, the loveless duty that had defined her marriage, stirred a protective anger in Kyle. That she had spent decades denied the simple joy of genuine affection seemed a cruelty beyond even Thorian's murder attempt. Every touch between us will always be your choice, he promised, his voice rough with emotion. Never an obligation. Elenya's smile was small but genuine. Another way you differ from most men of power. The reminder of his concealed position hung between them, but Kale chose not to address it directly. Instead, he moved to check on his horse and set up a more comfortable bedroll for Elenya from their limited supplies. You should rest, he suggested, arranging his cloak to provide her additional warmth against the cooling night. I'll keep watch. You need sleep as well, she countered, concern evident in her voice. You've barely rested since finding me. Kale smiled, touched by her worry. Years of sleepless nights have made me quite accustomed to vigilance. I'll wake you at dawn. As Elenya settled onto the makeshift bed, Kyle positioned himself against a nearby tree, sword within easy reach. The forest had fallen quiet, too quiet perhaps, but he chose not to worry her with his suspicions. If Thorian's men had tracked them this far, they would likely wait until dawn to attack, a standard mercenary tactic, believing sleep-weary travelers would be easier targets in early morning light. Kyle? Elenya's voice drifted to him from her bedroll. Yes? When we reach Vernaris, when I finally learn who you truly are. She hesitated. Will I regret what happened between us tonight? The question pierced him more deeply than he expected. That will be for you to decide, he answered honestly. But I will regret nothing. Satisfied with his answer, Elenya closed her eyes, exhaustion quickly claiming her. Kale watched the gentle rise and fall of her chest, marveling at the resilience of this woman who had endured betrayal, poison, and near death, yet still found courage to reach for connection, to reach for him. As the night deepened around them, Kyle allowed himself to imagine, just briefly, what might be possible between them once they reached Vernaris. When she learned he was king, would she see it as deception or necessity? Would the weight of his crown create a distance that their journey had bridged? Or would she understand that for the first time in 7 years, He had found something worth living for beyond duty. The questions had no immediate answers, but as he watched over Alenya's sleeping form, Cale made a silent vow. Whatever came after, he would ensure she never again felt powerless or discarded. She would have choices, respect, and safety, regardless of what she ultimately decided about him. In the shadows beyond their camp, a twig snapped softly. Cale's hand moved to his sword hilt, his senses immediately alert. The night was not yet over, and dangers still lurked in the darkness. But with each challenge they survived together, the bond between them grew stronger, a force perhaps more powerful than any title he possessed or enemy they faced. The attack came with the first pale light of dawn. 4 men emerged from the forest shadows, weapons drawn, moving with the practiced stealth of seasoned killers. But Cale had been waiting, alert throughout the night, his suspicions confirmed by subtle sounds and instincts honed through years of warfare. Before the mercenaries could reach their sleeping target, the king was on his feet, sword gleaming in the early morning light. "Alenya," he called sharply, never taking his eyes off the approaching men. "Mount up, now." She woke instantly, years of living with Thorian's unpredictable moods having taught her to transition from sleep to alertness in seconds. Without question, she scrambled to her feet and moved toward the horse, which Cale had kept saddled through the night in anticipation of this very scenario. The lead mercenary, a hulking man with a jagged scar bisecting his left cheek, sneered as he advanced. "Noble fool, you could have walked away from this." "Could I?" Cale positioned himself between the attackers and Alenya. "Somehow I doubt your employer's generosity extends to witnesses." "Smart man," the mercenary acknowledged with a cold smile. "Too bad intelligence won't save you." They attacked as one, a coordinated assault that spoke of military training rather than common banditry. But they hadn't counted on facing a king who had led armies into battle, who had trained daily with the finest swordsmen in Vernaris since boyhood. Cale moved with lethal efficiency, his blade a silver blur as he parried the first thrust, sidestepped the second, and delivered a fatal strike to the third attacker. Despite his skill, the odds were concerning. A sharp pain lanced through his side as one blade found its mark, slicing through his tunic to score his ribs. Cale grunted but didn't falter, turning the pain into focused rage as he engaged the scarred leader. Behind him, Alenya had reached the horse but hadn't mounted. Instead, she had grabbed a burning branch from their dying campfire and now wielded it like a torch, her face set with grim determination. "Cale, behind you!" she shouted. He spun just in time to see the 4th mercenary attempting to circle around. Without hesitation, Alenya thrust the flaming branch into the man's face. He screamed, stumbling backward, hands clutching at his burned eyes. Cale seized the opportunity, dispatching him with a single thrust before turning back to face the leader. "Impressive," the scarred man acknowledged, circling warily. "The Countess has more spirit than Thorian suggested." His eyes narrowed. "And you fight like no common traveler. Who are you, really?" "Someone you should have avoided," Cale replied coldly. They clashed again, steel ringing against steel. Despite his injury, Cale fought with controlled power, each movement deliberate and deadly. When the opening came, he took it without hesitation, his blade slipping past the mercenary's guard to find his heart. As the man fell, his final words escaped in a bloody whisper. "The Count won't stop until she's dead." Silence descended on the forest clearing, broken only by Cale's labored breathing and the nervous shuffling of the horse. Alenya approached cautiously, still gripping the smoldering branch, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and grim satisfaction. "You're wounded," she said, gaze fixed on the spreading crimson stain on his side. Cale sheathed his sword, pressing a hand to the injury. "It's not deep." "Let me see." The authority in her voice surprised them both. When he hesitated, she added more softly, "Please, you've tended my wounds. Allow me to return the favor." Relenting, Cale sat on a fallen log while Alenya retrieved their waterskin and the pouch of healing herbs Idrin had provided. With careful movements, she helped him remove the upper portion of his tunic, exposing the wound, a clean slice about 4 inches long across his ribs, painful but not life-threatening. "You were fortunate," she murmured, dampening a cloth to clean away the blood. Cale watched her work, struck by the confidence in her movements. "You've done this before." "Many times," she confirmed, applying a paste of herbs to the wound with gentle fingers. "In Raventhal, I often tended to injured servants when Thorian deemed their wounds unworthy of the physician's attention." The revelation added another layer to his understanding of her, not merely a noblewoman accustomed to luxury, but someone who had found ways to exercise compassion despite her husband's coldness. As her hands moved across his skin with practiced efficiency, Kyle felt a surge of admiration for her quiet strength. "You keep surprising me," he said softly. Elenya glanced up, her hands pausing momentarily. "How so?" "Most noblewomen would recoil at the sight of blood. Yet here you are, tending wounds and fighting off attackers with fire." A smile ghosted across her lips. "Perhaps I was never suited to be a proper countess. Or perhaps what constitutes proper deserves reconsideration." Cale winced slightly as she wrapped a bandage firmly around his torso. "There," she said, securing the end of the bandage. "It should hold until we reach civilization." As she helped him replace his tunic, their eyes met. Something unspoken passing between them, an acknowledgement of how they had fought together, each protecting the other. The intimate moment was interrupted by the sound of distant hoofbeats, a reminder that their position remained precarious. "We should move," Kyle said, rising to his feet. "These men will be missed and others will come." They mounted swiftly, Kyle settling behind Elenya this time, allowing her to take the reins while he conserved his strength. As they rode deeper into the forest, following game trails that would be difficult to track, Elenya broke the tense silence. "That man knew who I was," she observed, her voice tight. "The mercenary called me Countess." "Thorian must have been explicit in his instructions," Kyle replied grimly. "He's making no pretense about his intentions now." Elenya's shoulders tensed beneath his hands. "He truly wants me dead, after 21 years of marriage." The pain in her voice stirred Cale's protective instincts anew. "Some men view others merely as instruments for their ambition. Your husband appears to be such a man." "And what kind of man are you, Cale?" she asked softly, the question hanging in the air between them. He considered his answer carefully. "One who believes that power exists to protect, not to exploit. A noble sentiment." She glanced back at him, her expression guarded. "But rare among those who actually possess power." "Perhaps, but not as rare as you might think." Kyle guided her to turn the horse westward, toward a stream he remembered from his youth. "In Vernaris, such ideals are the foundation of governance." "You speak of your kingdom with such devotion," Elenya noted, "as if its welfare were your personal responsibility." Cale tensed slightly, aware he'd revealed more than intended. "Every citizen bears responsibility for the society they inhabit. Some simply have greater means to effect change than others." The forest thinned as they approached the stream, sunlight dappling through the canopy above. Birds called to one another in the branches, the peaceful scene a stark contrast to the violence they'd left behind. Kyle directed Elenya to follow the stream northward, where it would eventually lead them to more traveled roads. "How much farther to Vernaris?" she asked after they had ridden in comfortable silence for some time. 2 days, perhaps less if we make good progress," Cale replied. "Once we cross into Vernaris lands, we'll be safer. Thorian's men will be reluctant to violate the kingdom's borders. And then what?" The vulnerability in her question was unmistakable. "What becomes of me once we reach safety?" Cale's arms tightened slightly around her waist. "That will depend on what you want, Elenya. For perhaps the first time in your adult life, the choice will be truly yours." "Choice," she repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar concept. "I'm not certain I would even know what to do with such freedom." "You would learn," he assured her, "and you would not be alone in the process." She fell silent, contemplating his words as they continued along the stream. The water gurgled peacefully over smooth stones, a constant soothing presence beside them. After nearly an hour, the stream widened into a small pond, its surface reflecting the blue sky above. "We should rest here," Kyle suggested. "Refresh ourselves and the horse." They dismounted, Kyle moving more stiffly than before, his wound clearly causing him discomfort despite his attempts to conceal it. Elenya noticed but said nothing, respecting his pride while keeping a watchful eye on him. The pond's edge offered a carpet of soft moss beneath a massive oak tree, its sprawling branches providing welcome shade. Elenya knelt by the water, splashing her face and neck, washing away the grime of travel and combat. When she turned, she found Kale watching her, an unguarded tenderness in his expression that made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked softly. "You look different," he observed, "more alive than when I found you in the desert." Elenya touched her face self-consciously. "I must look a fright. Weeks without proper toilette, sleeping rough." "Beautiful," he interrupted gently. "You look beautiful, Elenya." The simple statement, delivered without artifice or agenda, struck her more powerfully than any elaborate courtly compliment ever had. In Thorian's court, beauty was currency, a tool for advancement and manipulation. But in Kale's eyes, she saw appreciation untainted by calculation. "No one has ever looked at me the way you do," she admitted, lowering her gaze. Kale moved closer, his hand rising to tilt her chin upward, forcing her to meet his eyes again. "How do I look at you?" "As if I matter," she whispered. "Not my title, not my connection to Raventhal, just me." "Because you do matter," he said with quiet conviction. "You always have, even when Thorian failed to see it." The space between them seemed to contract, the air growing heavy with unspoken feelings. Elenya's heart raced as Kale's thumb brushed lightly across her cheek, his touch reverent. Unlike their first kiss, tentative and questioning, this time she moved toward him with certainty, her lips finding his in a kiss that spoke of newfound courage. Kale responded with restrained passion, one hand cradling her face while the other settled at her waist, drawing her closer. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the warmth between them. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily, eyes wide with the realization of how quickly their connection had intensified. "I'm sorry," Elenya began, but Kyle shook his head. "Never apologize for something we both want," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She studied his face, searching for any sign of the calculation or dominance she'd grown accustomed to seeing in men. Finding none, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "It's strange," she mused, "to want something for myself after so many years of existing for others' expectations." "It's not strange," Kel countered. "It's human." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "And long overdue." The intimacy of the moment was interrupted by the distant sound of voices, travelers on the main road that ran parallel to the stream perhaps half a mile away. The reminder of the outside world broke the spell between them, reality intruding on their private sanctuary. "We should continue," Kyle said reluctantly. "It's not safe to linger." As they mounted once more, Elenya noticed he made no effort to conceal his injury from her, allowing her to help him into the saddle, a small but significant demonstration of trust. When she settled in front of him, his arms encircled her with a familiarity that felt both new and somehow inevitable, as if they had been moving toward this connection from the moment he found her in the desert. "Kyle," she began hesitantly as they rode away from the pond, "when we reach Vernaris, when I learn who you truly are, will this change?" She gestured vaguely between them. His silence lasted long enough that she feared she'd overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Some things will change," he acknowledged. "Circumstances, obligations, perhaps expectations. But what exists between us, this respect, this care, that need not change unless you wish it to." "And if I wish it to grow stronger?" The boldness of her question surprised even herself. Kale's arms tightened around her waist, his chest solid against her back. "Then we will face whatever comes together." The simple promise, offered without grand declarations or excessive sentiment, reassured Elenya more than flowery vows ever could. As they rode northward toward Vernaris, toward truth and whatever future awaited them, she found herself experiencing something long forgotten. Hope, fragile but persistent, blossoming in the space where fear had once ruled. By midday, the terrain began to change. The dense forest gradually gave way to gently rolling hills covered in tall grasses that swayed like golden waves beneath the summer sun. In the distance, the first hints of civilization appeared, small farmsteads scattered across the landscape, plumes of smoke rising from stone chimneys into the clear blue sky. "We're approaching Vernaris's southern border," Kyle explained, pointing toward a weathered watchtower perched atop a distant hill. "That tower marks the edge of the kingdom." Elenya didn't miss his correction. "Your kingdom," she said softly. "You've slipped several times now, speaking of Vernaris as if it belonged to you personally." Kale's silence was confirmation enough. Elenya twisted in the saddle to look at him, her expression unreadable. "You hold a position of significant authority there, don't you? More than just a nobleman." "Yes," he admitted, seeing little point in further evasion when the truth would soon be unavoidable. "More than a nobleman." Before she could press further, movement on the road ahead caught their attention. A small caravan of merchants approached, 3 wagons loaded with goods, escorted by armed guards wearing the blue and silver livery of Vernaris. "Perfect timing," Kale murmured. "We'll join them. Safety in numbers." As they approached, Elenya felt Kale shift behind her, straightening his posture and adopting a more formal bearing despite his relatively humble attire. When the lead guard spotted them, his eyes widened in shock, hand moving instinctively to his sword before recognition dawned. The guard began, but Kyle cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Well met, Captain Merrick," he called out, his voice carrying a natural authority that hadn't been present before. "Fortunate to find your patrol on this road." The captain recovered quickly, bowing from his saddle. "Indeed, Sir, the kingdom has been concerned about your—" He glanced uncertainly at Elenya. "Your absence." "No doubt," Kyle replied smoothly. "I trust all is well at the capital?" "The council maintains order, though they grow increasingly anxious," the captain answered carefully. "It's been nearly 2 weeks since—" "Captain," Kale interrupted again, "may I present Lady Elenya of Raventhal, who travels under my protection. She requires safe passage to the capital." Captain Merrick's gaze shifted to Elenya, curiosity and respect mingling in his expression as he bowed again. "My lady, you are most welcome to join our escort. We would be honored to provide any assistance you require." The deference in his manner, clearly directed toward both her and Kale, confirmed what Elenya had begun to suspect. This was no ordinary nobleman beside her. The guard's barely concealed reverence, the careful choice of words, the obvious desire to use a title he'd been silently forbidden from uttering, all pointed to a station far higher than Kale had admitted. As they joined the caravan, the merchants and guards maintained a respectful distance, stealing curious glances at the unusual pair. The travel-worn, injured man and the elegant woman who, despite her disheveled appearance, carried herself with unmistakable nobility. "They know you," Elenya observed quietly, when they had settled into the caravan's rhythm, their horse now walking alongside the lead wagon. "Yes," Kale acknowledged. "Yet they speak to you as if—" She hesitated, the full implications of her suspicions almost too overwhelming to voice. "As if you hold authority over them all." Kyle met her questioning gaze steadily. "Elenya, when we reach the palace, everything will become clear. I ask only that you reserve judgment until then." "The palace," she repeated, the final piece clicking into place. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Dear God, you're not simply a court official or noble advisor, are you? You're—" A sudden commotion from the rear of the caravan interrupted her revelation. Shouts erupted, followed by the unmistakable clash of steel against steel. Kale reacted instantly, pulling their horse around to face the disturbance, his hand going to his sword. "Stay with the lead wagon," he ordered Elenya, the authority in his voice brooking no argument. "Captain Merrick to me." 5 riders had emerged from a hidden ravine, attacking the caravan from behind. They wore no colors or insignia, but their target was clear, their eyes fixed on Elenya as they cut through the surprised guards. "Thorian's men," Kale growled, recognizing the leader as one of the mercenaries who had escaped their earlier encounter in the caves. Despite his injury, Cale dismounted smoothly, joining Captain Merrick and his men as they formed a defensive line between the attackers and the wagons. The merchants scrambled for cover, while Elenya remained frozen atop their horse, torn between following Cale's command to retreat and her unwillingness to leave him facing danger. The skirmish was brutally efficient. Vernaris guards were no common soldiers but elite fighters, trained to protect their kingdom's borders. Even so, the mercenaries fought with the desperate ferocity of men who knew failure meant certain death at their employers' hands. Cale moved with the same lethal grace Elenya had witnessed in the forest, his sword finding gaps in defenses with uncanny precision. Yet she could see his earlier wound hampering him, his movements fractionally slower than before. When one mercenary broke through the defensive line, charging directly toward Elenya, Cale intercepted him with a desperate lunge that left his own side exposed. The mercenary leader seized the opportunity, his blade slicing across Cale's already wounded ribs. The sound that escaped him, half grunt, half strangled cry, spurred Elenya to action. Without conscious thought, she urged their horse forward, directly into the melee. Grabbing a fallen guard's spear from the ground, she wielded it inexpertly but with determined force, driving it toward the mercenary who had wounded Cale. Her aim was true enough to distract him, forcing him to defend against this unexpected attack and giving Cale the moment he needed to recover his stance. "For Thorian," the mercenary snarled, his blade now turned toward Elenya. "The Count sends his regards to his faithless wife." "His faithless wife?" Elenya's voice rang out, loud enough for all to hear. "Tell Thorian it was he who betrayed our vows when he left me to die in the desert." The public accusation against a neighboring nobleman shocked the Vernaris guards momentarily, but Captain Merrick recovered quickly, pressing the attack with renewed vigor. Within moments, the remaining mercenaries were either dead or fleeing back toward the ravine. Elenya dismounted hastily, rushing to where Cale leaned heavily against a wagon wheel, his hand pressed to his bleeding side. The bandage she had applied earlier was now soaked through with fresh blood, his face alarmingly pale. "You fool," she whispered fiercely, helping him sit. "Why didn't you stay back? Your wound is nothing compared to your safety," he finished, his voice strained but resolute. Captain Merrick approached, his expression grave as he assessed Cale's injury. "Sire, you require immediate attention. We must get you to the palace without delay." The address, "Sire," hung in the air between Cale and Elenya. Their eyes met, the truth finally spoken aloud through another's lips. "Sire," she repeated softly, the weight of the revelation settling over her. "You're not merely a nobleman of Vernaris." Kyle's expression softened with regret. "No, Elenya, I am its king." The admission transformed everything, every interaction, every conversation, every moment of connection between them, casting them in a new and complicated light. Elenya pulled back slightly, processing this truth that changed the very foundation of their relationship. "All this time," she began, her voice barely audible, "you let me believe you were simply a traveler, a man who happened upon me in the desert." "I was that man," Cale insisted, wincing as Captain Merrick began examining his wound. "My crown doesn't change what passed between us, Elenya." She rose to her feet, creating physical distance that mirrored her emotional withdrawal. "Doesn't it? You're not just any man, Kyle. You're King Cale of Vernaris, ruler of these lands, master of these people." Her gesture encompassed the guards who now watched them with undisguised curiosity. "You've held power over our every interaction from the moment you found me." "That's not true," he protested, struggling to stand despite Merrick's attempts to keep him still. "Elenya, please." But she had already stepped back. Her expression shuddered in a way he hadn't seen since those first days at Idrin's dwelling. The openness they had cultivated, the trust they had built through shared danger and intimate revelations, all now threatened by this final, crucial truth he had withheld. "My lady," Captain Merrick interjected carefully, "if I may speak plainly, His Majesty rarely travels without his royal guard. When he left the palace alone 2 weeks ago, it caused great concern throughout the kingdom." The captain's gaze moved respectfully between them. "Whatever circumstances led to your meeting, I assure you they were not planned or orchestrated." Elena's composure wavered slightly at the captain's words, her eyes returning to Cale, who stood watching her with a mixture of pain and resignation. "Your wound needs tending," she said finally, her tone neutral. "We should continue to the palace without delay." It wasn't forgiveness or understanding, but it wasn't rejection either. Cale nodded, allowing the captain to help him back onto his horse. This time, Elena chose to ride in one of the wagons, the physical separation speaking volumes about her emotional state. As the caravan reorganized and continued its journey toward the capital, the tension between them remained palpable. The revelation of Cale's true identity had raised questions Elena wasn't prepared to confront. Questions about power, choice, and the possibility of genuine connection across such a vast divide of station. By nightfall, they had crossed fully into Vernaris territory, making camp near a small village whose inhabitants brought fresh food and clean bandages upon learning of the king's presence. Word had spread quickly, and Elena watched from a distance as the villagers approached Cale with a mixture of reverence and genuine affection that spoke of a beloved ruler, not a feared one. Despite the village headwoman's offer of proper lodging, Cale insisted on remaining with the caravan, though he accepted her assistance in tending his wound. Elena kept her distance, using the time to wash in a nearby stream and attempt to make herself more presentable, borrowing a comb and clean clothing from a merchant's wife who seemed honored to assist the lady who traveled with the king. When she returned to the camp, she found Cale sitting alone by a small fire, away from the main gathering. His expression lightened momentarily when he saw her approach, hope flickering in his eyes. "May I join you?" she asked formally, the easy familiarity of their forest conversations now replaced by cautious courtesy. "Please," he replied, gesturing to the space beside him. Elena sat, smoothing the borrowed dress, far simpler than her usual courtly attire, but clean and well-made. For several minutes neither spoke, the crackling fire filling the silence between them. "I should have told you sooner," Cale finally said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I wanted to, many times." "Why didn't you?" The question held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. Cale stared into the flames, considering his answer carefully. "At first, it seemed unnecessary, a complication that wouldn't matter if you didn't survive the scorpion's venom." He glanced at her. "But then, as you recovered, as we spoke, as we connected, I found myself treasuring the way you looked at me." "How did I look at you?" Elena asked softly. "Like I was simply a man," he replied, the honesty in his voice unmistakable. "Not a crown, not a throne, not a kingdom's expectations embodied in human form. Just Cale." His hand moved tentatively toward hers but stopped short of touching. "Do you know how rare that is for someone in my position?" Elena considered his words, remembering the isolation of her own much lesser title, how her station had always colored her interactions, how people had approached her as Countess of Raventhal rather than as herself. How much more isolating must a crown be? "I understand the desire to be seen for yourself," she acknowledged. "But deception—" "Not deception," he interrupted gently. "Omission, yes. A selfish delay of an inevitable truth, certainly. But never deception, Elena." His eyes held hers steadily. "Everything else, who I am beneath the crown, what I believe, what I feel for you, that was all truth." The sincerity in his gaze weakened her resolve to maintain distance. "And what do you feel for me, Cale? Or should I call you Your Majesty now?" "God, no," he said with such vehemence that a small smile tugged at her lips despite herself. "Not from you. Never from you." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "What I feel for you defies simple naming, Elena. It began as instinctive protection, grew into admiration, and has become something I never expected to feel again after my wife's death." The vulnerability in his confession touched her deeply. King or not, the man before her was the same one who had carried her through the desert, who had fought to protect her, who had looked at her with such tenderness beneath the forest canopy. "Tomorrow we reach the capital," she said after a moment. "What happens then, to me?" Cale straightened, sensing her need for practical reassurance rather than emotional declarations. You will be received as an honored guest of the crown. Private chambers, attendance, whatever comforts you require. His tone was carefully measured. And protection, absolute protection, from Thorian's reach. And then, she pressed, when the initial welcome fades, what becomes of a foreign countess whose husband wants her dead? A political complication for your kingdom, surely. You are not a complication, Elenya. You are... He paused, searching for words. You are a woman of remarkable courage and dignity who has been gravely wronged. Vernaris has laws against such crimes, regardless of who commits them. You would move against a neighboring nobleman, risk diplomatic tensions with Raventhal? For justice? Without hesitation. The certainty in his voice was absolute. Thorian's actions constitute attempted murder, a crime our treaty explicitly condemns. There will be a formal investigation, a public hearing if necessary. Elenya's eyes widened at the implications. You would give me a voice, a chance to speak against him? Your voice is your own, Elenya. I would never presume to grant or withhold what inherently belongs to you. Kale's expression softened. But yes, you will have a platform from which to speak, and the authority of Vernaris to ensure you are heard. The promise, not of personal favor but of institutional justice, resonated deeply. This was not a man offering protection in exchange for affection, but a ruler committed to principles regardless of personal feelings. Elenya's hand moved across the small space between them, her fingers lightly touching his. Thank you. The simple contact, freely offered after hours of distance, filled Kale with cautious hope. There is one more thing you should know before we reach the capital, he said, turning his hand to gently clasp hers. The court will have expectations, assumptions about why I traveled alone, why I returned with you. Court gossip, she said with the weary knowledge of someone long accustomed to such scrutiny. In Raventhal there were always whispers about Thorian and me, about why we remained childless, about my influence on his decisions. This will be different, Kyle warned. I have not taken personal interest in any woman since my queen died 7 years ago. Your arrival at my side will spark speculation that may prove uncomfortable for you. Elenya considered this, her thumb unconsciously tracing small circles against his palm. And what would you have me do? How should I behave in your court? However feels true to you, he answered simply. I ask nothing beyond what you freely wish to give, be it friendship, distance, or... He left the third possibility unnamed, suspended between them like a fragile hope. The honesty in his response moved her more than grand promises might have. After years with Thorian, where every interaction carried hidden expectations and veiled demands, Kale's straightforward respect for her autonomy was profoundly healing. I don't know what I wish yet, she admitted. Everything has happened so quickly, from nearly dying in the desert to sitting beside a king discussing court politics. A small, incredulous laugh escaped her. It hardly seems real. I understand, Kale assured her. There is no rush, Elenya. Vernaris offers you sanctuary for as long as you desire it, regardless of what develops or doesn't develop between us. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strength and weariness there. Despite his royal status, he looked utterly human in that moment, a man carrying the weight of a kingdom alongside personal hopes and fears. The complexity of her feelings toward him couldn't be easily resolved, but Elenya found herself unwilling to retreat completely behind walls of formality. I'm still angry that you didn't tell me sooner, she said quietly, but I understand why you hesitated. Her fingers tightened slightly around his. And I'm grateful that you found me in that desert, Kale, king or not. He smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing visibly. So am I. As night deepened around them, they remained by the fire, speaking softly of lighter matters, of Vernari's customs she should know, of the capital city's layout, of the royal gardens that offered solitude when court life became overwhelming. It wasn't a return to their former intimacy, but neither was it formal distance. Instead, they began the careful work of redefining their connection with this new truth acknowledged between them. Tomorrow would bring the capital, the court, and all the complexities of Kale's royal status. But tonight, beneath stars that had witnessed their journey from desperate strangers to something neither could yet fully name. They found a fragile peace in simple conversation and the tentative renewal of trust. The capital of Vernaris rose majestically against the morning sky, its white stone walls gleaming in the sunlight like a crown upon the fertile valley. As their caravan approached the main gates, Elenya found herself speechless at the sight. Unlike the dark, brooding architecture of Raventhal, with its harsh angles and imposing towers, Vernaris was built to welcome rather than intimidate. Elegant spires reaching skyward, colorful banners fluttering in the breeze, and wide avenues visible even from a distance. "It's beautiful," she murmured, unable to contain her awe. Cale, riding beside her now rather than sharing a mount, smiled at her reaction. "My grandfather began the transformation after the Great War. He believed a kingdom should reflect its values in stone as well as in laws." As they approached the gates, a change came over their traveling party. Captain Merrick moved his horse ahead, signaling to the guards at the watchtower. Within moments, a flurry of activity ensued. Trumpets sounded, guards stood at attention, and a formal escort assembled with remarkable speed. Cale straightened in his saddle, his expression shifting subtly into what Elenya was beginning to recognize as his royal face. Composed, dignified, with a careful distance that hadn't been present during their journey. The transformation was subtle but profound, and she felt a pang of loss for the more open man she had come to know. "Your Majesty," the captain of the city guard approached, bowing deeply. "The kingdom rejoices at your return. The council has been notified and awaits you in the palace." "Thank you, Captain Lowell," Cale replied, his voice carrying the natural authority she had glimpsed during their travels. "Please inform the council I will meet with them after I've attended to my guest." He gestured toward Elenya. "Lady Elenya of Raventhal travels under my personal protection and is to be accorded every courtesy." Captain Lowell bowed to Elenya, curiosity evident in his eyes despite his professional demeanor. "Of course, Your Majesty. Chambers have already been prepared in the East Wing, as per Captain Merrick's advance messenger." As they passed through the gates, the change in atmosphere was immediate and overwhelming. Citizens stopped in their tracks, bowing or curtsying as their king rode past. Children darted forward to throw flower petals in their path. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through a wheat field, eyes darting between the king and the unknown noblewoman at his side. Elenya maintained her composure, drawing on years of experience as a countess, but inwardly she felt exposed beneath the collective gaze of Vernaris. These people knew nothing of her. Not her near death in the desert, not her husband's betrayal, not the fragile connection that had formed between her and their king. Yet their expressions held speculation enough to fill volumes. "They're wondering who I am," she observed quietly. "They're wondering what you mean to me," Cale corrected, his voice equally low. "I rarely bring guests into the city riding at my side." The implication hung between them as they continued toward the palace that crowned the city's central hill. Unlike the cramped, winding streets of many medieval capitals, Vernaris featured wide, straight avenues lined with trees and small gardens. People moved with purpose, but without the desperate hurry Elenya had observed in other cities. The overall impression was one of prosperity and order, a well-governed realm. When they reached the palace gates, a formal receiving line awaited them. Courtiers in elegant attire, officials with ceremonial chains of office, and at their head, an elderly man whose dignified bearing suggested significant authority. "Lord Chancellor Aldrich," Cale explained as they dismounted, "my most trusted advisor and my father's before me." The elderly man stepped forward, bowing with the ease of long practice. "Your Majesty, we welcome your return with great relief. The council awaits your convenience." His shrewd eyes turned to Elenya, assessing but not unkind. "And we welcome your distinguished guest as well." The formality of the greeting after weeks of survival in the wilderness felt almost surreal to Elenya. She curtsied gracefully, years of court training taking over despite her fatigue. "You honor me with your welcome, Lord Chancellor." "Lady Elenya will require rest before any formal introductions," Cale stated, his tone making it clear this was a command rather than a suggestion. "Please see that she is comfortable and has everything she needs." "Of course, Your Majesty." The Chancellor gestured, and a well-dressed lady-in-waiting stepped forward, Lady Marraine will attend to your guests' needs." As Elenya prepared to follow Lady Marraine into the palace, Kale touched her arm lightly, drawing her slightly aside from the others. "Rest. Recover," he said, his voice softening to the tone she'd grown accustomed to during their journey. "We'll speak later, when you're ready." The simple reassurance that their connection hadn't been entirely subsumed by royal protocol calmed some of the anxiety that had been building in her chest since they'd entered the city. She nodded, allowing herself to be led away while Kyle turned to his waiting officials. The interior of the palace was as impressive as its exterior, soaring ceilings supported by graceful columns, windows of colored glass casting rainbow patterns across polished stone floors, tapestries depicting historical scenes rather than conquests. Lady Marraine led her through corridors that buzzed with activity, courtiers and servants pausing to bow or curtsy as they passed. "These will be your chambers, my lady," Lady Marraine announced, opening a carved wooden door to reveal a suite that took Elenya's breath away. The rooms were spacious and airy, with large windows overlooking a private garden. A four-poster bed draped in blue silk dominated one wall, while comfortable seating clustered near a fireplace where flames already danced. Fresh flowers filled silver vases, their scent mingling with the subtle aroma of beeswax candles. "Is it to your liking?" Lady Marraine asked, a hint of pride in her voice. "It's magnificent," Elenya replied honestly, "far more than I expected." "His Majesty was most specific in his instructions," Lady Marraine explained, moving to open doors that revealed a dressing room and private bathing chamber. "These are the Queen's guest chambers." The significance of this designation wasn't lost on Elenya. "The Queen's chambers?" "Reserved for royal visitors and those of special significance to the crown," Lady Marraine clarified diplomatically. "A bath has been prepared and I've taken the liberty of having several gowns brought for your selection. After your ordeal, you must wish to refresh yourself." The mention of her ordeal reminded Elenya how little the palace staff actually knew about her circumstances. How much had Kale shared? How much would become common knowledge? "Lady Marraine," she began carefully, "I'm curious what you've been told about my arrival." The lady-in-waiting's expression remained professionally neutral. "Only that you are Lady Elenya of Raventhal, that His Majesty encountered you during his absence from the capital, and that you travel under his personal protection." She paused delicately. "The court naturally has questions, but His Majesty's business is his own." "Naturally," Elenya echoed, relieved that details of her husband's betrayal hadn't become palace gossip, at least not yet. After Lady Marraine had shown her the amenities of the chambers and helped her into the bath, Elenya finally found herself alone for the first time since entering the city. The hot water soothed muscles tense from weeks of travel, but did little to quiet her mind. Everything had changed since crossing the palace threshold. The Kyle she had come to know, the man who had carried her through the desert, who had fought beside her, who had shared intimate truths by firelight, now seemed distant, concealed behind layers of protocol and royal responsibility. Had those moments of connection been real, or merely the product of extraordinary circumstances? After her bath, she selected the simplest of the offered gowns, a deep blue creation with minimal ornamentation that nonetheless surpassed in elegance anything she had owned in Raventhal. Lady Marraine returned to help her dress and arrange her hair, her practiced hands transforming Elenya from travel-worn survivor to proper noblewoman with remarkable efficiency. Looking in the polished silver mirror, Elenya barely recognized herself. The woman who gazed back seemed a stranger, composed, elegant, untouched by the harsh realities of desert abandonment and desperate flight. Yet beneath the surface appearance, she knew herself irrevocably changed by her experiences. A soft knock at the outer door interrupted her thoughts. Lady Marraine answered it, returning with news that King Kale requested the honor of her company for a private dinner, if she felt sufficiently rested. "Please inform His Majesty that I would be delighted," Elenya replied, her formal words masking the flutter of anticipation in her chest. An hour later, a palace guard escorted her not to the great hall she had expected, but to a smaller, more intimate chamber overlooking the royal gardens. Kyle awaited her there, no longer in travel-stained garments, but dressed in attire befitting his station. A deep green tunic embroidered with silver thread, the crown of Vernaris resting on a nearby table rather than upon his head. He turned as she entered, and the look that crossed his face, wonder, appreciation, something deeper that defied naming, sent warmth coursing through her. "Elenya," he said simply, crossing to take her hands in his. "You look transformed?" she suggested, a hint of uncertainty in her smile. "Restored," he corrected gently, "to the dignity that was always yours." The sincerity in his voice bridged some of the distance that palace formality had created between them. He led her to a table set for two beside windows that captured the last golden light of sunset, the gardens beyond aflame with color. As they sat, Elenya noticed they were truly alone. No servants hovered nearby. No guards stood at attention within the chamber. This wasn't a state dinner, but a private moment carved from royal obligations. "Your counsel wasn't pleased about being delayed," she observed, accepting the wine he poured for her. Kale's smile held a touch of the wry humor she'd glimpsed during their journey. "They've waited 2 weeks. They can wait until tomorrow for a full accounting of my absence." "And what will you tell them?" Elenya asked, curious about how he would explain their meeting and subsequent journey. "The truth," he replied simply. "That I encountered a noblewoman in dire circumstances, that her husband had committed crimes that demand investigation, and that she now resides under Vernaris's protection while the matter is resolved." "You won't mention—" She hesitated, uncertain how to define what had developed between them. "My personal feelings?" Kale set down his wine glass, his expression turning serious. "The council has no authority over my heart, Elenya. What exists between us is not a matter of state." The distinction felt important, that amid all his royal duties and obligations, he preserved this connection as something separate, something that belonged to them alone. "And does something still exist between us?" she asked quietly. "Now that we're here? Now that you're no longer just Kale, but King Kale of Vernaris?" He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I am both. The man you came to know in the desert and the king who sits before you now. One doesn't negate the other." His fingers tightened slightly. "Unless you wish it to." Elenya turned her hand beneath his, their palms meeting. "I don't wish it to," she admitted softly. "But I'm afraid, Kale. Everything is so different here. I don't know where I fit in this world of yours." "Wherever you choose to fit," he said with quiet conviction. "That has always been my promise to you. Choice, genuine choice, without coercion or expectation." The evening deepened around them as they dined, their conversation gradually reclaiming some of the ease they had developed during their journey. Kale spoke of his kingdom's history, of reforms he had implemented since taking the throne, of challenges that lay ahead. Elenya shared observations about differences between Vernaris and Raventhal, insights that sometimes surprised him with their perceptiveness. As servants finally arrived to clear away the remains of their meal, Kyle suggested a walk in the gardens. The night air was cool but pleasant as they strolled along torch-lit paths, the scent of night-blooming jasmine surrounding them. "I've been considering how best to address Thorian's actions," Kale said after they had walked in comfortable silence for several minutes. "Legally, there are multiple approaches available to us." "Us?" Elenya questioned. "This is your life, Elenya. Your justice to seek." Kale stopped beneath a flowering arbor, turning to face her fully. "I will not make decisions about your future without your full participation." The respect inherent in his statement, so different from how she had been treated for most of her adult life, moved her deeply. "What options do we have?" "We could pursue formal charges through the treaty council that governs relations between our kingdoms," Kale explained. "Such a case would be public, with testimony from both sides. It would likely result in Thorian's formal censure, possibly removal of his title." "He would fight such charges fiercely," Elenya noted. "He has allies in high places." "Indeed. The alternative would be diplomatic pressure applied more discreetly. I could request an audience with Raventhal's sovereign, present evidence of Thorian's crimes, and seek a private resolution." Elenya considered both approaches, appreciating that Kale presented them as genuine options rather than directing her toward his preferred solution. What would a private resolution entail? At minimum, a formal dissolution of your marriage and restoration of your family properties, Kale replied. At best, Thorian's quiet removal from power without the spectacle of a public trial. And at worst? At worst, Raventhal's king dismisses the accusations, and we must pursue more direct methods. The edge in Kale's voice suggested these direct methods might involve force rather than diplomacy. Elenya paced a few steps away, considering the implications of each path. A public trial would give me voice, allow me to speak truth to power as you promised. She turned back to him. But it would also expose me to scrutiny, force me to relive the betrayal before strangers. Yes, Kale acknowledged. There is no path forward without cost, Elenya. The question is, which costs you are willing to bear? The honesty of his assessment, his refusal to simplify the complex reality she faced, strengthened her trust in him. Unlike Thorian, who had always presented only the information that served his purposes, Kale offered her the full picture, respecting her ability to navigate difficult truths. I need time to consider, she said finally. This decision will shape whatever future I build from the ruins of my past. Take all the time you need, Kale assured her. You are safe here. He hesitated, then added more softly, and you are not alone unless you wish to be. The subtle reference to their personal connection, distinct from the political matters they discussed, warmed her despite the cool night air. The complexity of their situation, her status as both a woman seeking justice and a woman drawn to the king who offered that justice, was not lost on her. Kyle, she began carefully, there's something we must address. My presence here, our connection, it complicates matters politically. Politics has never dictated my heart, he replied, stepping closer to her. Not when I was a prince, not now as king. But it influences how others perceive your actions, she countered. If you champion my cause while also pursuing a personal relationship with me, some will question your motivations. They'll claim you act from personal interest rather than justice. Kale's expression grew serious. You fear your case will be undermined by our connection? I fear your authority might be, she corrected. And that would serve neither of us. He considered her words, respect evident in his thoughtful silence. What would you suggest? Perhaps distance, at least publicly, until matters with Thorian are resolved. The suggestion cost her more than she had anticipated, the words almost sticking in her throat. For the sake of ensuring justice is seen to be done impartially. Kyle studied her face in the torchlight, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're protecting me, my crown, my reputation. Is that so surprising? She asked softly. From most people? Yes. He moved closer, his hand rising to gently touch her cheek. From you? Perhaps not. You've shown remarkable concern for others even in the midst of your own suffering. The tenderness in his touch threatened to unravel her resolve. I'm not asking for complete separation, she clarified, her voice barely above a whisper. Only prudence in how we appear before the court. Public discretion, he summarized, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. But privately? Elenya leaned slightly into his touch, her eyes meeting his with newfound certainty. Privately, I find myself unwilling to surrender what began between us in the desert, whatever name we give it. The relief that washed across Kale's features was almost palpable. Then we are of one mind, he murmured, drawing her gently into his arms. Unlike their previous embraces, tentative explorations of unfamiliar territory, this felt like coming home. Elenya relaxed against him, her head finding its place against his shoulder as his arms encircled her waist. For a long moment they stood in silence, the weight of royal duties and political complications temporarily lifted by the simple comfort of human connection. We'll find a way forward, Kale promised quietly. For your justice, for Vernaris's honor, and for this. His arms tightened slightly around her. Whatever it may become. As they walked back toward the palace, maintaining a proper distance once they came within view of the windows, Elenya felt a strange sense of peace amid the uncertainty of her situation. The path ahead remained complex, fraught with political and personal challenges. Yet for the first time since Thorian's betrayal, she wasn't facing those challenges alone. Tomorrow would bring council meetings, strategic discussions, and the first steps toward whatever justice she might claim. But tonight, in the quiet of the royal gardens, she had chosen to trust not just in Kael's protection or his power, but in the connection that had formed between them against all odds. A connection that offered possibilities she had long ago stopped believing might exist for her. Morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of Vernaris's council chamber, casting jewel-toned patterns across the massive oak table where 12 solemn faces regarded their king. Kael sat at the head, his posture relaxed yet commanding, as Lord Chancellor Aldrich concluded his report on kingdom affairs that had transpired during the royal absence. "And finally, Your Majesty," the Chancellor added, glancing at his notes, "Princess Helvia of Elvria has sent 3 separate communications requesting clarification about her proposed visit next month. It seems her father is particularly eager to discuss potential alliances." A meaningful silence followed this statement. Kael's unmarried status had been a matter of diplomatic opportunity for neighboring kingdoms since the appropriate mourning period for his queen had ended years ago. Princess Helvia's interest was merely the latest in a series of diplomatic overtures that thinly veiled marital ambitions. "Send my regards to Princess Helvia and her father," Kael replied evenly. "Inform them that Vernaris welcomes diplomatic exchange but makes no commitments at this time." The Chancellor nodded, making a notation. "Very good, sire. Now, regarding the matter of Lady Elenya of Raventhal—" "I will address that personally," Kael interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Lady Elenya's situation involves sensitive diplomatic considerations that require my direct attention." Several council members exchanged glances, their curiosity barely concealed. Lord Merrick, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Your Majesty, perhaps it would be helpful if the council understood the nature of Lady Elenya's presence in Vernaris. There are rumors circulating about her relationship to Count Thorian of Raventhal and the circumstances of her arrival." Kael considered the request, weighing the need for council support against Elenya's privacy. "Lady Elenya is the lawful wife of Count Thorian," he began carefully. "During my solitary travels, I discovered her abandoned in the desert, suffering from a scorpion sting that evidence suggests was deliberately arranged by her husband." Shocked murmurs rippled around the table. Chancellor Aldrich's bushy eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Deliberately, Your Majesty? You suggest Count Thorian attempted to murder his own wife?" "I do not merely suggest it. I state it as fact based on evidence gathered during our journey to safety and confessions from mercenaries sent to complete the task when the desert failed to claim her life." Kael's voice remained measured despite the anger that flashed in his eyes. "Twice more during our return to Vernaris, hired killers attempted to silence Lady Elenya permanently. Lady Isolde, the only woman on the council and representative of Vernaris's northern provinces, leaned forward. "This is a grave accusation against a nobleman of a neighboring realm, Your Majesty. What evidence supports Lady Elenya's account beyond the word of captured mercenaries?" The question held no malice, only the practical consideration of a seasoned diplomat. Kael acknowledged its validity with a respectful nod. "I witnessed the aftermath personally, Lady Isolde. The scorpion's venom nearly killed her. Only Idrin's healing skills saved her life. Furthermore, the mercenaries carried Raventhal gold and specifically identified Count Thorian as their employer." He paused, meeting each council member's gaze in turn. "But more compelling than these facts is the Count's motive. He seeks marriage to Princess Helvia of Elvria, the same princess whose emissaries now press for my attention." This revelation brought stunned silence to the chamber. Lord Merrick recovered first, his diplomatic mind quickly connecting implications. "So Count Thorian sought to eliminate his current wife to pursue a politically advantageous marriage, potentially creating an alliance that could challenge Vernaris's regional influence." "Precisely," Kael confirmed, "which makes this not merely a matter of personal justice for Lady Elenya, but a matter of state security for Vernaris." The framing shifted the council's perception immediately. What might have been dismissed as a domestic dispute requiring mere courtesy, now presented as a strategic concern demanding official response. "What course of action do you propose, Your Majesty?" Chancellor Aldrich asked. "Lady Alenia deserves justice, and Vernaris must address this affront to our laws, as the crimes occurred partly within our borders." Kale leaned forward, his voice gaining intensity. "I intend to call for a formal inquiry under the Treaty of the Five Kingdoms, which explicitly prohibits nobility from seeking the death of their spouses for political advancement." Lord Merrick nodded thoughtfully. "The treaty provisions would indeed apply. However, Count Thorian will deny everything, and Raventhal's king may support his denial. Which is why we must gather irrefutable evidence and present it formally," Kale replied. "I want diplomatic emissaries sent to Raventhal immediately. Not to accuse, but to observe. I want detailed reports on Count Thorian's movements, his communications with Elvria, any unusual financial transactions." The council spent the next hour discussing strategy, with Kyle carefully guiding the conversation toward consensus, without revealing the depth of his personal investment in Alenia's cause. When they finally adjourned, only Chancellor Aldrich remained behind, his weathered face bearing the thoughtful expression Kale recognized from his childhood, the look that preceded uncomfortable but necessary wisdom. "You didn't find her by chance," the old man stated rather than asked once they were alone. Kale met his mentor's gaze steadily. "What makes you say that?" "I've known you since you were a boy tugging at your father's sleeve during council meetings," Aldrich replied with a gentle smile. "You've never believed in coincidence, and you don't take solitary journeys without purpose." The insight reminded Kale why he valued the Chancellor's counsel above all others. "You're right," he admitted. "I received intelligence about Thorian's ambitions weeks ago. Reports of unusual activity along our southern border led me to investigate personally." "And finding Lady Alenia was part of that investigation?" "No," Kale said softly. "Finding her was unexpected. Fate, perhaps, if you believe in such things." Aldrich studied him for a long moment. "And your feelings for her? Were they also unexpected?" The direct question caught Kale off guard. He considered deflecting, but decided against it. This man had earned his honesty over decades of loyal service. "Completely," he acknowledged. "I didn't intend. I haven't felt since Queen Lyra." Aldrich finished for him, understanding in his eyes. "The court has noticed, Kale. The way you look at her, the chambers you've given her, your personal intervention in her case." "Is it so obvious?" Kale asked, concerned for both Alenia's reputation and the political ramifications they had discussed the previous night. "To those who know you well," the Chancellor replied, "but your public behavior has been appropriately reserved. I simply want you to be aware that walls have eyes and courts have memories." Kale nodded, accepting the gentle warning. Alenia herself suggested discretion until her situation with Thorian is resolved. She's concerned about compromising the legitimacy of any justice she might receive. "A wise woman," Aldrich observed, approval evident in his tone. "She considers the consequences of her actions on others, even in the midst of her own crisis. She is—" Kale paused, searching for words adequate to describe Alenia's character. "Extraordinary in ways that have nothing to do with title or station." The Chancellor's smile deepened with genuine warmth. "Then I am glad for you, my boy. Truly." He rose from his seat, collecting his papers. "Just remember that as king, your private choices inevitably become matters of public interest. Proceed with care, for her sake as well as your own." After Aldrich departed, Kale remained alone in the council chamber, considering the complex path ahead. The political strategy was clear enough, but navigating the personal dimensions of his relationship with Alenia while maintaining the dignity her situation demanded would require careful balance. He was still deep in thought when a soft knock at the chamber door announced Lady Marin, who curtsied before delivering her message. "Your Majesty, Lady Alenia asks if you might spare a moment to speak with her today. She has been reviewing the legal documents you sent and has questions regarding the treaty provisions." "Of course," Kale replied, pleased by Alenia's proactive engagement with the legal aspects of her case. "Please inform her I'll join her in the South Library in 1 hour." The South Library, with its towering shelves and comfortable alcoves, offered both privacy and propriety, a space where they could speak freely while remaining visible enough to avoid court gossip. When Kyle arrived, he found Elenya already there, surrounded by unfurled scrolls and leather-bound legal texts. She wore a gown of deep burgundy that complemented her coloring, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style that spoke of her integration into palace life despite her brief residence. She rose as he entered, offering a formal curtsy that maintained appearances for the benefit of the library attendants. "Your Majesty, thank you for coming." "Lady Elenya," he responded with equal formality, though his eyes conveyed warmer sentiments. "I understand you have questions about the treaty. Several, if you have time to discuss them." She gestured to the documents spread before her. Kale dismissed the attendants with a nod, and they retreated to a discreet distance that offered the appearance of privacy while keeping the king and his guest within sight, exactly the balance of propriety and practicality they had agreed upon. Once they were relatively alone, Elenya's formal demeanor softened slightly. "How was your council meeting?" "Productive," Kale replied, taking a seat across from her. "They support pursuing justice through the treaty mechanisms, particularly once I explained the potential alliance Thorian seeks with Elvria." Elenya's expression darkened momentarily. "So my personal suffering becomes relevant when it threatens Vernaris politically." "To some council members, yes," Kale acknowledged honestly, "but not to me, and not to all of them. Lady Isolde in particular seemed concerned for your well-being, regardless of political implications." "Lady Isolde," Elenya repeated thoughtfully. "The northern representative? I'd like to meet her." "That can be arranged easily." Kyle gestured to the documents between them. "Now, what questions have arisen from your reading?" For the next hour, they discussed the intricacies of the Treaty of the Five Kingdoms, particularly the provisions concerning crimes committed by nobility. Elenya's questions revealed both intelligence and strategic thinking. She wasn't merely seeking to understand the law, but considering how it might be applied most effectively to her unique situation. The treaty specifies that testimony must be corroborated by physical evidence or multiple witnesses, she noted, pointing to a specific clause. Thorian was careful. "The mercenaries we captured are dead or fled. It becomes my word against his." "Not entirely," Kale countered. "We have Idrin's testimony regarding the scorpion venom and your condition when I brought you to him. We have Captain Merrick and his men who witnessed the second attack. And we have this." He produced a small pouch from his tunic and carefully emptied its contents onto the table. A gold coin bearing Raventhal's seal, found on one of the mercenaries who had attacked them. Elenya stared at the coin, memories of that desperate fight in the forest washing over her. Will it be enough? Combined with diplomatic intelligence we're gathering about Thorian's movements and communications with Elvria, yes. Kale's confidence was reassuring. The Treaty Council takes such accusations very seriously, especially when supported by a sovereign. "And what of Princess Helvia herself?" Elenya asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Might she provide testimony about Thorian's overtures?" Kale's eyebrows rose slightly. "An interesting thought. If she were willing to confirm his proposals while you still lived as his wife, it would strengthen our case considerably. She may not realize she was being used as part of a murderous scheme," Elenya mused. "Perhaps she deserves to know the character of the man who sought her hand." The suggestion revealed Elenya's compassion even for a woman who might have replaced her, a nobility of spirit that continually impressed Kale. "I'll have our diplomats make discreet inquiries about her willingness to provide a statement." As their discussion concluded, Kale noticed Elenya's gaze drifting periodically toward the library windows, which overlooked the palace training grounds where his royal guard practiced combat maneuvers. "Would you like to observe more closely?" he offered. "The captain is demonstrating defensive formations today. Quite impressive to witness." Elenya hesitated, then nodded. "I would, actually. After our experiences in the desert and caves, I find myself curious about formal military training." They walked together to the training grounds, maintaining a respectful distance that nonetheless allowed for private conversation. The guards snapped to attention as their king approached, but Kale waved them back to their exercises with casual authority. Captain Lowell approached, bowing to Kale and offering a courteous nod to Elenya. "Your Majesty, my lady." We're honored by your interest in today's drills. Lady Elenya has shown remarkable courage in combat situations, Kale explained, a hint of pride in his voice. She recently used a burning branch to fend off an attacker when our party was ambushed. The captain's expression registered appropriate admiration. Resourceful and brave, my lady. Perhaps you might enjoy learning some basic defensive techniques during your stay in Vernaris. The suggestion clearly caught Elenya by surprise. Would that be appropriate? Several noble women of the court train in basic self-defense, Kyle informed her. Lady Isolde herself is quite accomplished with a dagger. Vernaris believes all its citizens, regardless of gender, deserve the knowledge to protect themselves if necessary. Another difference between her new sanctuary and the restrictive environment of Raventhal, where women were expected to rely entirely on male protection. The prospect of gaining skills that might have helped her against Thorian's treachery was undeniably appealing. I would very much like to learn, she decided. Excellent, the captain responded. With His Majesty's approval, I'll arrange for Sergeant Mira to provide instruction at your convenience. She specializes in teaching defensive techniques to court ladies. As they continued watching the training exercises, Elenya felt a strange sense of empowerment. In just days, Vernaris had offered her more autonomy and respect than she had experienced in 21 years of marriage. The freedom to study legal documents, to participate in her own case, to learn self-defense. These small permissions represented a fundamentally different view of women's capabilities than she had known before. You're quiet, Kale observed as they walked back toward the palace. Are you uncomfortable with the training suggestion? It was not meant to pressure you. No, she assured him quickly. I'm simply adjusting. In Raventhal, a countess would never be encouraged to defend herself. Knowledge of law was considered unnecessary for women. Even my work tending injured servants was barely tolerated. Kale's expression darkened momentarily. Thorian took more from you than your safety and freedom. He denied you the right to develop your own capabilities. As did most husbands of my acquaintance, Elenya pointed out. It wasn't unique to him, merely the custom. A custom Vernaris rejected generations ago, Kale replied, genuine pride evident in his voice. My grandmother served as regent for 12 years during my father's minority. She established many of the educational traditions that ensure women's voices are valued in our governance. They had reached the palace gardens, where afternoon sunlight bathed the stone pathways in golden warmth. A few courtiers strolled nearby, offering respectful acknowledgments as they passed. Kale guided Elenya toward a more secluded alcove, where a stone bench nestled beneath flowering vines. May I speak plainly? He asked once they were relatively private. Always, she replied, settling onto the bench. You've been in Vernaris only days, yet you've already begun establishing yourself, studying our laws, considering defensive training, questioning our customs. His admiration was evident. Many in your position would be overwhelmed, retreating into passive acceptance of whatever protection was offered. Elenya considered this assessment. Perhaps near death changes one's perspective. After believing my life was over, each day now feels like an unexpected gift, one I'm determined not to waste in helplessness. And your future? Kyle asked carefully. Have you thought beyond the resolution with Thorian? The question touched on uncertainties she had only begun to contemplate. Assuming the Treaty Council rules in my favor and my marriage is dissolved, I would have legal right to reclaim my family properties in Raventhal, she began slowly. But returning there, living under Thorian's shadow, constantly looking over my shoulder, she shook her head. It holds little appeal. And remaining in Vernaris? Kyle suggested, his tone deliberately neutral despite the hope that flickered in his eyes. Elenya met his gaze directly. That depends on many factors, doesn't it? My legal status once freed from Thorian, my ability to establish independent means, and... She paused, gathering courage. What exists between us, which remains undefined? By design, Kale reminded her gently. I promised you time, freedom from pressure or expectation. And I value that promise, she assured him. But I'm also practical, Kale. A foreign noblewoman remaining indefinitely in Vernaris without clear purpose would eventually raise questions, regardless of royal protection. The observation demonstrated her understanding of court politics, another quality that impressed him. What if you had purpose here, a role that utilized your compassion and intelligence? Intrigued, Alenia turned more fully toward him. What kind of role? I've been considering establishing a new position within the court, an advocate for those who have suffered injustice but lack voice or influence to seek redress. Cale's expression grew animated as he outlined the vision. Someone who could bridge the gap between common petitioners and royal authority, ensuring worthy cases receive proper attention. And you think I might fill such a role? The idea clearly surprised her. Who better than someone who has experienced injustice firsthand? Cale pointed out. Your insight into Raventhal's customs would also provide valuable perspective on cases involving our neighboring kingdoms. The proposal offered exactly what Alenia had feared might be impossible: a future of meaningful work, independent standing, and continued proximity to Cale without dependence on personal favor. It was thoughtful, practical, and surprisingly aligned with her own emerging sense of purpose. I would need to learn more about Vernaris law, she mused, already considering the practical aspects, and establish relationships with council members beyond just yourself. All of which can be arranged, Kyle assured her. Consider it a possibility, not an immediate decision. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the garden, they walked back toward the palace, discussion turning to more immediate concerns about the upcoming diplomatic exchanges with Raventhal. Neither mentioned the unspoken implications of the proposed position, that it would provide legitimate reason for Alenia's continued presence in Vernaris, allowing their personal connection to develop at its own pace without political pressure or court speculation. Yet both felt the significance of this potential future path, one that honored Alenia's independence while creating space for whatever might grow between them once the shadows of Thorian's betrayal had been banished by justice. A fortnight passed with remarkable swiftness as Alenia settled into life at the Vernaris court. Each day brought new discoveries, not only about the kingdom that had offered her sanctuary, but about herself. The woman who had spent 21 years as Thorian's dutiful wife was gradually being replaced by someone more confident, more engaged with the world around her. Her mornings were devoted to study in the palace library, mastering Vernaris law and the Treaty of the Five Kingdoms under Chancellor Aldrich's occasional guidance. Afternoons often found her in the private courtyard with Sergeant Mira, learning basic defensive maneuvers that left her muscles aching, but her spirit strengthened. And in the evenings, she increasingly participated in court gatherings, carefully establishing her own identity, separate from her connection to Kyle. The king himself maintained their agreed-upon public discretion, interacting with Alenia at official functions with the same courteous attention he showed other noble guests. But there were private moments too, walks in the royal gardens, quiet dinners in his personal study, conversations that deepened their understanding of each other beyond the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting. On this particular morning, Alenia stood in her chambers before a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Gone was the hollow-cheeked, frightened creature who had stumbled into Vernaris clinging to a king's protection. In her place stood a woman dressed in Vernaris blue, her posture straight, her eyes clear and determined. "You look magnificent, my lady," Lady Marin observed as she made final adjustments to Alenia's hair. "The court will be most impressed." Today would be Alenia's first appearance before the full Vernaris Council, where she would formally present her testimony against Count Thorian. After weeks of diplomatic exchanges and evidence gathering, the case was finally proceeding to official hearing. "I'm not concerned with impressing the court," Alenia replied, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her gown. "Only with speaking truth that will be heard." A knock at the door announced Lady Isolde, the northern representative who had become something of a mentor to Alenia during her time in Vernaris. The older woman entered with her characteristic brisk energy, her silver-streaked hair arranged in the practical style she preferred. "Well, you certainly look ready to face those stuffy counselors," she declared approvingly. "Remember what we discussed? Speak directly, answer questions concisely, and don't allow them to lead you into speculation." Alenia smiled gratefully at the forthright advice. In Lady Isolde she had found not only a political ally, but a friend who understood the challenges of navigating male-dominated power structures. "I've prepared as thoroughly as possible," Elenya assured her, "though I must admit to some nervousness about facing the full council." "Perfectly natural," Lady Isolde responded, dismissing Lady Marin with a nod. Once they were alone, her expression softened slightly. "There's news you should be aware of before the hearing. Princess Helvia has arrived in Vernaris." Elenya's eyes widened in surprise. "Helvia? Here? I thought the diplomatic exchanges with Elvria were being conducted through emissaries." "As did we all," Lady Isolde confirmed. "She arrived last evening with minimal retinue, requesting immediate audience with the king. According to Chancellor Aldrich, she has provided written testimony confirming Thorian's marriage proposals that began months ago, well before your desert ordeal." The confirmation of Thorian's premeditated betrayal sent a chill through Elenya, despite the room's warmth. Although she had known the truth in her heart, hearing that he had been actively pursuing another woman while still married to her made the pain fresh again. "This strengthens our case considerably," she acknowledged, focusing on the practical implications rather than the personal hurt. "Why would she provide such testimony? It can hardly benefit Elvria politically." Lady Isolde's expression turned grim. "It seems the princess has her own grievances against Count Thorian. According to her statement, once she learned you still lived, she confronted him directly. His response was concerning." "What did he do?" Elenya asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "He threatened her, subtly of course, as is his way, implying that unfortunate accidents could befall even princesses if they interfered with his ambitions." Lady Isolde's eyes flashed with indignation. The princess is young but not foolish. She recognized the threat for what it was and decided Thorian was not a man Elvria should align with, regardless of potential political advantages. Elenya sank onto a nearby chair, processing this revelation. So he's escalated from attempting to murder an inconvenient wife to threatening a princess of Elvria. His ambition has truly consumed whatever honor he might once have possessed. Men who taste power often hunger for more, regardless of the cost to others, Lady Isolde observed sagely. This is why Vernaris maintains strict laws about how power may be exercised, even by our highest nobility. The clock tower chimed the hour, reminding them that the council session would begin soon. Elenya rose, gathering her composure along with the documents she had prepared. "Will Princess Helvia attend the hearing?" she asked as they moved toward the door. "No, but her written statement will be presented as evidence. I understand she has requested to meet you privately afterward." Lady Isolde studied Elenya's reaction carefully. "You're not obligated to grant this request, of course." Elenya considered the strange position she found herself in, preparing to meet the woman her husband had intended to replace her with. "I will meet her," she decided. "We are both Thorian's victims in different ways. Perhaps there's comfort in that shared understanding." They walked together through the palace corridors, Lady Isolde's presence beside her lending Elenya confidence as they approached the Grand Council chamber. At the massive oak doors, Kael awaited them, dressed in formal royal attire that emphasized his status as sovereign. Despite the gravity of the occasion, his eyes warmed visibly when they met Elenya's. "Lady Elenya," he greeted her with public formality that did nothing to mask the private concern in his voice. "Are you prepared for today's proceedings?" "As prepared as one can be, Your Majesty," she replied, matching his formal tone while communicating her readiness through steady eye contact. Kyle nodded, understanding flowing between them without need for further words. "The council awaits. Lady Isolde will remain with you throughout as your advocate." The council chamber fell silent as they entered, 12 faces turning to observe the woman whose case had consumed diplomatic channels for weeks. Elenya recognized most from previous individual meetings. Chancellor Aldrich with his bushy eyebrows, Lord Merrick, whose diplomatic skills had secured crucial testimony, Lady Elaine, who represented Vernaris's merchant guilds. Each had formed their own impressions of her. Today would determine whether those impressions included respect for her testimony. Kael took his place at the head of the table, his bearing regal yet approachable, the essence of his leadership style embodied in his posture. "Honored Council, We gather today to hear formal testimony regarding grave accusations against Count Thorian of Raventhal. Lady Elenya comes before us not merely as a petitioner seeking asylum, but as a witness to crimes that violate the Treaty of the Five Kingdoms. Chancellor Aldrich rose, unrolling an official document bearing multiple seals. Before Lady Elenya speaks, I must inform the Council that we have received formal correspondence from King Gareth of Raventhal regarding this matter. A murmur of interest rippled through the assembly. Elenya tensed, fearing that Thorian's influence with his king might have undercut their case before she could even present it. King Gareth acknowledges receipt of our evidence and expresses deep concern about the accusations against Count Thorian. Aldrich continued, scanning the document. He has initiated his own internal investigation and, most significantly, has temporarily suspended Thorian's diplomatic authority pending resolution of these charges. Relief washed over Elenya, so powerful she nearly swayed where she stood. Lady Isolde's hand found her elbow, steadying her with a supportive grip. This represents a significant diplomatic victory, Lord Merrick noted. Raventhal rarely intervenes in the affairs of its nobility without substantial cause. Indeed, Cale agreed, his expression revealing nothing of the personal satisfaction he must surely feel. Now let us hear directly from Lady Elenya herself. As Elenya stepped forward to the witness position, a strange calm settled over her. The faces before her represented not just Vernaris' authority, but the possibility of justice she had scarcely dared hope for. When she began speaking, her voice emerged stronger than she had anticipated, carrying to every corner of the chamber without strain. Honored Council, I come before you not seeking vengeance, but truth. After 21 years as Countess of Raventhal, I found myself abandoned in the desert, poisoned by a scorpion's sting that evidence suggests was deliberately arranged by my husband, Count Thorian. She proceeded methodically through her testimony, describing the changes in Thorian's behavior in the months leading up to their fateful desert journey. The night she had awakened to find him near her bedroll, the scorpion's sting and his subsequent abandonment of her. She detailed the mercenary attacks during her journey to Vernaris, presenting the Raventhal gold coin found on one attacker as physical evidence. Throughout her account, the Council listened with focused attention, interrupting only to request clarification on specific points. Chancellor Aldrich occasionally added context from diplomatic correspondences, while Lord Merrick presented Princess Helvia's written statement confirming Thorian's marriage proposals during a period when Elenya was very much alive. When she finished speaking, Lord Osric, the most skeptical member of the Council, leaned forward with a challenging expression. Lady Elenya, while your account is compelling, some might suggest that a woman scorned might fabricate such accusations to damage her husband's reputation. What would you say to such skeptics? Elenya met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated by the implied questioning of her integrity. I would say, Lord Osric, that a woman truly scorned might seek far simpler revenge than orchestrating diplomatic investigations across multiple kingdoms. If personal vendetta were my motivation, there are more direct paths available than subjecting myself to public scrutiny and questioning. Her measured response seemed to satisfy him, a grudging respect appearing in his expression as he sat back. Lady Isolde squeezed her arm approvingly. Chancellor Aldrich rose once more, assuming his role as procedural guide. Having heard Lady Elenya's testimony and reviewed the supporting evidence, the Council must now consider our recommendation to King Cale regarding official Vernaris' position on this matter. Cale nodded, his expression appropriately solemn for the formal proceedings, though Elenya caught the flash of pride in his eyes as he glanced her way. Lady Elenya, you have spoken with clarity and dignity. While the Council deliberates, please accept the gratitude of Vernaris for your courage in bringing these serious violations to proper attention. The formal dismissal allowed Elenya to withdraw while the Council discussed her testimony in private. Lady Isolde accompanied her to an antechamber where refreshments had been prepared, closing the door behind them with a smile of genuine admiration. "Magnificently done," she declared, pouring Elenya a much-needed cup of water. "I've rarely seen Lord Osric silenced so effectively." Elenya's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the cup, the composed facade she had maintained beginning to crack now that the ordeal was over. "Do you think they believed me? Truly believed me?" Without question, Lady Isolde assured her. The evidence is substantial, your testimony was consistent, and Princess Helvia's statement removes any doubt about Thorian's intentions. She settled into a chair opposite Elenya. The Council will recommend formal censure through the Treaty Alliance. Mark my words. Elenya sipped her water, trying to process the reality that justice might truly be within reach. And what becomes of Thorian? That will depend on King Gareth's internal investigation, Lady Isolde explained. Vernaris can demand diplomatic consequences, but criminal punishment would fall to Raventhal's own justice system. I don't seek his death, Elenya said quietly. Only enough consequences to ensure he cannot harm others as he tried to harm me. The door opened before Lady Isolde could respond, revealing Chancellor Aldrich. Lady Elenya, the Council has reached its recommendation with remarkable speed. King Kyle requests your return to hear the formal decision. Re-entering the council chamber, Elenya felt the weight of every gaze upon her. Kyle now stood rather than sat, an indication that formal pronouncement was imminent. His expression revealed nothing, maintaining the appropriate separation between personal feelings and royal decree. Lady Elenya of Raventhal, he began, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. Having considered your testimony and the supporting evidence, the Royal Council of Vernaris unanimously recommends that your case be forwarded to the Treaty Alliance with our kingdom's full diplomatic support. Relief flooded through her, but Kale wasn't finished. Furthermore, the Council recommends that Vernaris extend formal protected status to you during these proceedings, guaranteeing your safety on our soil regardless of diplomatic pressures that may arise. His eyes met hers briefly. Do you accept this protection, Lady Elenya? I do, Your Majesty, she replied, the formal words barely containing the emotion behind them. And I thank Vernaris for its justice. Chancellor Aldrich stepped forward with an official document. This decree requires royal signature to take effect. If His Majesty approves the Council's recommendation. Kale accepted the quill without hesitation, his signature bold across the bottom of the parchment. It is done. Lady Elenya stands under Vernaris protection, and diplomatic proceedings against Count Thorian will commence immediately. The formality of the moment, the official legitimization of her claims after weeks of uncertainty, overwhelmed Elenya momentarily. Lady Isolde's steadying presence beside her was all that kept her composure intact as the council members rose, many approaching to offer personal words of support. When the chamber had mostly emptied, Kale finally approached her directly, public restraint giving way to genuine concern. You were magnificent, he said quietly. How are you feeling? Overwhelmed, she admitted, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. I've spent so long preparing for this moment that I hardly know what to feel now that it's arrived. It's only the beginning, he reminded her gently. The Treaty Alliance proceedings will take time, but this first victory is significant. Raventhal has acknowledged the legitimacy of your claims enough to suspend Thorian's authority. Lady Isolde approached, bowing slightly to Kale. Your Majesty, Princess Helvia awaits Lady Elenya in the East Solar, if she still wishes to meet. Kale's eyebrows rose slightly. Helvia requested a private audience with you. It seems we have certain experiences in common, Elenya explained, both targeted by Thorian's ambitions in different ways. Understanding crossed Kale's features. Of course, I'll leave you to that meeting then. He hesitated, then added more softly, perhaps you might join me in the royal gardens this evening, to celebrate this first step toward justice? The invitation, personal rather than official, brought warmth to Elenya's cheeks. I would like that very much. As she made her way to the East Solar, Elenya marveled at how much had changed in the weeks since her arrival in Vernaris. From desperate survivor to credible witness, from passive wife to active participant in her own destiny. The Council's decision represented more than diplomatic procedure. It was validation of her worth as a person deserving of justice. The princess who awaited her was younger than Elenya had expected, perhaps 25, with the golden hair typical of Elvria nobility and intelligent eyes that assessed Elenya carefully as she entered. Lady Elenya, Helvia greeted her, rising from her seat. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know this must be unusual. No more unusual than anything else that has happened lately, Elenya replied with a small smile that seemed to relax the princess. I understand I have you to thank for crucial testimony regarding Thorian's proposals. Helvia gestured for Elenya to sit, resuming her own seat with graceful movements. When I learned you still lived, that you had been left to die in the desert, I could not remain silent. No political alliance is worth enabling such cruelty. It took courage to provide that statement, Elenya acknowledged. Thorian is not a man who forgives perceived betrayal easily. So I discovered, Helvia replied grimly. His threat was subtle but unmistakable. In that moment, I understood what kind of man he truly was beneath the charming diplomatic facade. As the two women spoke, sharing their separate but connected experiences with Thorian's manipulations, Elenya felt an unexpected sense of solidarity forming. This princess, who could have been her replacement had Thorian's plan succeeded, was not her rival, but another woman who had glimpsed the darkness behind his ambition. What happens now? Helvia asked eventually. With the treaty alliance involved, there will be significant political fallout across all 5 kingdoms. Justice happens, Elenya answered simply. Beyond that, I can only hope that Thorian is prevented from harming others in pursuit of his ambitions. The princess studied her with newfound respect. You're not what I expected, Lady Elenya. When I agreed to meet you, I anticipated finding a bitter, vengeful woman. Instead, I find someone seeking justice rather than vengeance. Vengeance changes nothing, Elenya observed quietly. Justice, properly applied, changes everything. As their meeting concluded, Princess Helvia offered her hand in a gesture of solidarity. If you ever visit Elvria, you will be welcome at my father's court. Not as Thorian's wife, but as yourself, a woman of remarkable dignity in the face of unconscionable treatment. The unexpected alliance with Helvia felt like yet another step toward reclaiming her place in the world. Not as an extension of Thorian, but as Elenya in her own right. As she prepared later for her evening meeting with Kyle, selecting a simple but elegant gown of deep green, she realized that today had marked not just a legal victory but a personal transformation. When she joined Kale in the royal gardens at sunset, the golden light bathing the flowering paths in warm radiance, his smile of genuine pleasure at seeing her reinforced that sense of transformation. This was not the desperate woman he had rescued from the desert, nor merely a political case to be managed, but someone he had come to value for herself. To justice, he said simply, offering her a goblet of Vernaris's finest wine as they stood beneath a flowering arbor. To beginnings, she countered, her eyes meeting his with new confidence. The subtle correction made his smile deepen as they touched goblets. Indeed, to beginnings. Autumn painted Vernaris in fiery hues of amber and crimson as the trees surrounding the royal palace surrendered their summer greenery. 3 months had passed since Elenya's testimony before the council. 3 months of diplomatic exchanges, formal hearings before the treaty alliance, and gradual but undeniable progress toward justice. The royal gardens, though past their summer glory, held a different kind of beauty in this transitional season. Elenya walked along the leaf-strewn paths, her woolen cloak of deep burgundy keeping the morning chill at bay, as she contemplated the message that had arrived at dawn, a sealed document bearing the official crest of the treaty alliance. I thought I might find you here. Kale's voice interrupted her thoughts as he approached along the garden path. You've developed quite an attachment to these gardens. Elenya smiled, noting how he walked alone, without the usual retinue of advisors that typically surrounded him during daylight hours. They've become a sanctuary of sorts, a place to think when the palace feels overwhelming. And today you have much to consider, he observed, gesturing to the folded document she carried. You've read the Alliance's final judgment? Yes, she confirmed, her voice carefully neutral despite the emotions swirling beneath her composed exterior. It's quite thorough. Kale studied her face, reading the complex feelings she tried to conceal. Over the months of her residence in Vernaris, he had learned to recognize her subtle expressions, the slight furrow between her brows that indicated thoughtful concern, the way her fingers unconsciously smoothed non-existent wrinkles when she felt unsettled. Walk with me, he invited, offering his arm in a gesture that had become familiar between them. As they strolled deeper into the gardens, following a path that wound toward the small lake at its center, the formality between them softened. Here, away from courtiers' watchful eyes, they could speak as Kyle and Elenya rather than as king and petitioner. The alliance's decision represents a significant victory, Kale noted, breaking the contemplative silence. Full dissolution of your marriage, restoration of your family properties, formal censure of Thorian. Few cases have resulted in such comprehensive rulings. Yes, Elenya agreed, her tone still strangely subdued. Chancellor Aldrich believes the testimony from Princess Helvia proved decisive. Yet you seem troubled by this outcome, Kyle observed, stopping beside a stone bench that overlooked the lake. I expected you might feel vindicated, perhaps even relieved. Elenya sat, gathering her thoughts before responding. I am relieved, profoundly so. Justice has been served in ways I scarcely dared hope for when I first arrived in Vernaris. She traced the embossed seal on the document with her fingertip. But I'm also aware that this ruling changes everything. My status, my future, my... She hesitated, eyes lifting to meet his. My reason for remaining in Vernaris. The unspoken question hung between them. Throughout the treaty proceedings, Elenya's presence in Vernaris had been justified by diplomatic necessity and royal protection. Now, with formal judgment rendered, that necessity technically no longer existed. Do you wish to leave? Kale asked directly, his voice carefully controlled despite the tension evident in his shoulders. No, Elenya answered without hesitation, the certainty in her voice visibly relaxing him. But I must acknowledge reality, Kale. I am now, according to this document, Lady Elenya of Highcrest, restored to my family name and properties. The court will naturally question why I remain as a permanent guest of the crown. Kyle settled beside her on the bench, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. You're concerned about appearances, aren't you? She countered gently. These months of discretion have protected both your authority and my case from allegations of improper influence. But now that the case is resolved, now there is no diplomatic reason for discretion. Kale finished for her, a smile slowly spreading across his face. Only personal choice. The realization seemed to lighten something within her. Yes, I suppose that's it exactly. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, my path forward is truly my own to determine. And what path would you choose, Elenya of Highcrest? Kale asked softly. The question weighted with months of growing connection between them. Quiet dinners, long conversations, a deepening understanding that had transcended their extraordinary beginning. Elenya turned to face him fully, her expression open and vulnerable, in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. These months in Vernaris have shown me possibilities I never imagined. Working with the Council on matters of justice, studying your kingdom's laws, even training with Sergeant Mira, I've discovered capabilities within myself that Thorian's shadow had obscured. You've flourished here, Kale acknowledged, pride evident in his voice. The Council speaks highly of your insights, particularly regarding cases involving neighboring kingdoms. I've found purpose here, she agreed. And, her voice softened, other reasons to remain. The implication hung between them, neither willing to be the first to speak more directly of the feelings that had grown steadily since those first tenuous connections formed during their journey from the desert. The necessity of public discretion during the treaty proceedings had paradoxically allowed their private relationship to develop at its own pace, without court scrutiny or political pressure. Kale's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on the bench between them. I have a confession, he said, his tone shifting to something almost boyishly uncertain, a stark contrast to his usual royal confidence. A confession? Elenya echoed, her curiosity piqued by this unexpected vulnerability. I've been having discussions with Chancellor Aldrich about establishing that position we spoke of months ago, the advocate for those seeking justice who lack voice or influence. His thumb traced small circles against her palm. The Council approved the creation of the role last week. It awaits only formal appointment. Understanding dawned in Elenya's eyes. You've created a position for me. Not for you specifically, he corrected carefully. For someone with exactly your qualifications and experience. Whether you choose to accept it is entirely your decision. The distinction was crucial, not a dependent role offered as charity or personal favor, but a legitimate position created to serve Bernaris, one she was uniquely qualified to fill. It represented exactly the balance she had hoped for, purpose, independence, and a reason to remain that even the most critical courtier could not question. "And if I were to accept this position," she began, her voice steady despite the acceleration of her heart, "what would it mean for us?" The question finally addressed directly what had remained largely unspoken between them, despite the growing closeness of their private interactions. Cale's expression softened, the diplomatic mask he wore for his kingdom giving way to the man she had come to know beneath the crown. "It would mean I could finally ask you to accompany me to the autumn festival, not as a guest under royal protection, but as a woman I admire and—" He hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty, "a woman I have come to love." The declaration, simple but profound, hung in the crisp autumn air between them. Elena's breath caught, not from surprise at the sentiment, which had been evident in countless small gestures over the months, but at hearing it finally spoken aloud. "Love," she repeated softly, testing the word as if it were in a foreign language. In 21 years of marriage, Thorian never once used that word with me. Cale's jaw tightened momentarily at the reminder of her former husband's coldness. Then he failed to see the extraordinary woman before him. "And you believe you see me more clearly?" she asked, not doubtfully but with genuine curiosity. "I believe I've been privileged to witness your courage, your intelligence, your compassion, first in crisis, then in recovery, and now in strength." Kyle's gaze held hers steadily. "I've seen you fight mercenaries with a burning branch, challenge my council members with legal precedents, and extend forgiveness to Princess Helvia when most would have harbored resentment. Yes, Elenia, I believe I see you clearly." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. This was not courtly flattery or calculated seduction, but honest appreciation from a man who had indeed seen her at her most vulnerable and her most resilient. "I never expected this," she admitted, her free hand rising to touch his cheek gently. "When you found me in that desert, half dead and abandoned, I couldn't have imagined sitting here with you like this, hearing such words. Nor could I have imagined finding someone who would see beyond my crown to the man beneath it." Cale responded, turning his face slightly to press a kiss against her palm. "Someone who would challenge me, support me, and remind me of the human impact of royal decisions." The connection between them had always been unusual, beginning in crisis, developing through shared danger, and deepening through months of careful navigation of court politics. It bore little resemblance to conventional courtship, yet felt more genuine than any relationship either had previously known. "If I accept the advocate position," Elenia said thoughtfully, "there will be those who claim I earned it through personal connection rather than merit." "Undoubtedly," Cale agreed with refreshing honesty, "just as there will be those who claim any interest I show in you publicly is merely political advantage. Court gossip is inevitable, Elenia." "How would we face that?" she asked, the practical question revealing both her concerns and her consideration of a shared future. "With dignity, transparency, and the knowledge that those whose opinions truly matter understand the truth of both your qualifications and our connection." Cale squeezed her hand gently. "Chancellor Aldrich already does. So does Lady Isolde. The rest will follow as they observe your work." Elenia nodded, appreciating his realistic assessment rather than empty reassurances. Another thought occurred to her, one that had lingered at the edges of her mind since the treaty ruling arrived. "The document mentions my family estates at Highcrest. They're legally mine again." "Yes," Cale acknowledged, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. "If you wish to return there, to reclaim your ancestral home—" "I don't," she interrupted gently. "Highcrest holds few happy memories for me. It was my father's pride, but never truly my home." She paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. "But it does provide me with something I've never had before. Independent means lands and income that belong to me alone, not to a husband or a protector. Understanding dawned in Cale's eyes. Financial independence. Yes. The significance of this clearly resonated with both of them. Whatever happens between us, Cale, I need never again be dependent on a man's favor for my survival. That changes everything. Instead of feeling threatened by this declaration of independence, Kyle's expression reflected profound respect. As it should. Any relationship between us will be a choice freely made by both parties, not a matter of necessity or protection. The autumn sunlight caught the golden highlights in his hair as he leaned slightly closer. So, Lady Elenya of Highcrest, advocate of justice for Verneris, will you accompany your king to the autumn festival? As a beginning to whatever we might become to each other in the fullness of time. The formal invitation, delivered with a hint of playfulness that softened its implications, made her smile. I would be honored, Your Majesty. Her eyes sparkled with answering humor, though I suspect such a public appearance together will set the court gossips buzzing for weeks. Let them buzz, Cale replied with unexpected lightness. After 7 years of solitude following my queen's death, I imagine they've been anticipating such gossip for quite some time. Their laughter mingled in the crisp autumn air, a sound of shared amusement that reflected how far they had come from the desperate circumstances of their meeting. As the moment quieted, Cale's expression grew more serious, though no less warm. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into a small pouch at his belt, a tradition of Verneris when new positions of significance are created within the court. He withdrew a small silver pin shaped like a balanced scale, the symbol of justice throughout the 5 kingdoms, but rendered with distinctive Verneris artistry. This will identify you in your official capacity. Traditionally, it's presented at a formal ceremony, but I thought you might prefer a more private moment. Elenya accepted the pin with reverent hands, recognizing it as more than decorative insignia. It represented legitimate authority, recognized position, and the fruition of her journey from abandoned victim to respected advocate. It's beautiful, she murmured, running her finger along the delicate metalwork. May I? Kyle asked, gesturing toward the pin in the collar of her cloak. When she nodded, he carefully affixed the symbol to her garment, his fingers brushing against the fabric near her throat with gentle precision. The simple act carried ceremonial weight despite the private setting, an official recognition of her new role. There, he said softly, his hands lingering slightly longer than strictly necessary. It suits you. The double meaning wasn't lost on her. Both the physical pin and the role it represented fit her in ways neither of them could have anticipated months ago. When she looked up to thank him, she found his face closer than expected, his eyes searching hers with a question that required no words. Elenya answered by closing the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that held none of the hesitation or uncertainty of their earlier encounters. This was a choice made in strength rather than vulnerability, in knowledge rather than desperation. His arms encircled her waist as he responded with equal certainty, the autumn breeze stirring fallen leaves around the bench where their futures entwined. When they finally parted, Cale rested his forehead against hers, a smile of genuine joy lighting his features. The autumn festival is still 2 weeks away, he noted, his voice slightly hoarse. Perhaps we might begin our public appearances with something less ostentatious? A quiet dinner in the main hall, perhaps? Testing the waters, Elenya suggested with a small smile. Giving the court time to adjust gradually rather than shocking them all at once with a royal escort at the kingdom's most significant seasonal celebration, he clarified with practical wisdom. Though I admit my motives aren't entirely diplomatic, I find I'm suddenly unwilling to wait 2 weeks before spending an evening in your company without hiding behind closed doors. The honesty of his admission touched her deeply. Their connection had developed through stolen moments and private conversations, necessary for both political propriety and the natural progression of a relationship born in extraordinary circumstances. The prospect of acknowledging it openly, even gradually, represented a significant shift. A quiet dinner sounds perfect, she agreed, her hand finding his as they rose from the bench to continue their walk. And perhaps we might discuss the specifics of this advocate position. I find myself particularly interested in how I might structure the role to best serve those who need representation. Kale's smile widened at her immediate engagement with the professional aspects of her new position. This seamless blend of personal connection and shared purpose was precisely what made their relationship unlike any he had known. Even his first marriage, arranged for political alliance though later deepened into genuine affection, had never featured this particular quality of intellectual partnership. As they circled the lake, discussing the practical aspects of Alenya's new responsibilities, the treaty alliance document that had prompted their conversation remained folded in her pocket. Its official declarations had indeed changed everything, not by ending her time in Vernaris as she had initially feared, but by removing the final barriers to whatever future she and Kyle might build together. The path forward would not be without challenges. Court politics, neighboring kingdoms' reactions, and the inevitable comparisons to Kale's first queen would all create obstacles to navigate. But as autumn leaves drifted down around them, both felt an unprecedented certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals bound by mutual respect, shared purpose, and deepening love. Winter blanketed Vernaris in pristine white, transforming the royal gardens into a crystalline wonderland where frost glittered on bare branches like scattered diamonds. 1 year had passed since Alenya's near death in the desert, a year of profound transformation, healing, and unexpected joy. The palace hummed with activity as preparations for the midwinter festival reached their peak. Servants hurried through decorated corridors, arms laden with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. The scent of spiced wine and baking sweetbreads wafted from the kitchens, promising feasts to come. Unlike the somber observances of Raventhal, Vernaris celebrated winter's depths with light, warmth, and community, a reflection of Kale's belief that kingship meant sharing abundance rather than hoarding it. In her chambers, now permanently established in the east wing, Alenya stood before a looking-glass as Lady Marin made final adjustments to her gown, a creation of deep emerald velvet with silver embroidery that caught the light with every movement. The advocate's pin gleamed against the rich fabric, a symbol of the position she had filled with distinction over the past months. "You look radiant, my lady," Lady Marin observed, stepping back to appraise her work. "The court will be most impressed." Alenya smiled, recognizing how closely these words echoed those spoken before her council testimony a year earlier. Then she had been a woman seeking justice, uncertain of her place and future. Now she stood as Vernaris's respected advocate of justice, with 37 successful cases to her name, commoners and minor nobility alike who had found voice through her efforts. "The emerald suits you," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Alenya turned to find Lady Isolde entering, resplendent in the formal robes of the northern representative. The older woman had become both mentor and friend, her straightforward wisdom guiding Alenya through the complexities of court politics. "I thought you might be supervising the northern delegation's arrival," Alenya said, embracing Lady Isolde warmly. "They're settled and preparing for tonight's festivities," Isolde replied, dismissing Lady Marin with a practiced nod. Once they were alone, her expression softened. "I came to see how you're feeling on this significant day." Alenya's hand moved instinctively to the advocate's pin. 1 year since the desert. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. "In many ways it was," Isolde observed. "Few would recognize the woman who arrived half dead at our gates in the confident advocate who stands before me now." Before Alenya could respond, another knock at the door heralded Chancellor Aldrich, whose bushy eyebrows rose appreciatively at the sight of her formal attire. "Magnificent, Lady Alenya," he declared. "Most appropriate for tonight's announcements." An unspoken understanding passed between the three of them, awareness of what this evening's festival would bring beyond the usual midwinter celebrations. Alenya's heart quickened at the thought, a mixture of anticipation and lingering traces of disbelief that her life had brought her to this moment. "Has there been any word from Raventhal?" she asked, the question that had lingered at the edges of her mind for weeks, finally finding voice. Chancellor Aldrich's expression turned grave. "Indeed. The official correspondence arrived this morning. King Gareth confirms that Count Thorian's exile is permanent. He has been stripped of lands, title, and privileges within the kingdom. And his current whereabouts? Elenya pressed, needing the certainty of closure. Last seen boarding a merchant vessel bound for the Eastern Isles, Aldrich replied. With limited funds and no royal backing, he poses little threat to either Vernaris or yourself. The final confirmation of Thorian's fall from power settled over Elenya like the closing of a long read book. Justice complete at last. Not vengeance. She had never sought his death, but consequence proportional to his crimes. "Thank you for bringing this news today of all days," she said to Aldrich. "It feels fitting somehow." "Indeed it does," the Chancellor agreed. "A final resolution before new beginnings." Lady Isolde touched Elenya's arm gently. "We should allow you time to prepare for the evening's events. The king will be expecting you in the royal antechamber before the festival commences." As they left, Elenya moved to the window, overlooking the snow-covered gardens where her relationship with Kyle had gradually deepened from cautious connection to profound partnership. Their progress had been deliberate, private dinners becoming public appearances, formal cooperation becoming trusted confidence, tentative affection becoming undeniable love. The court had adjusted to their relationship with surprising grace, perhaps aided by Elenya's clear dedication to her advocacy work. She had established herself not as the king's favorite, but as a woman of substance and capability, who happened also to hold his heart. The distinction mattered deeply to her independence and to Cale's respect for that independence. A soft knock interrupted her reflections, a distinctive pattern that she recognized immediately. "Enter," she called, turning from the window with a smile already forming. Kyle stepped into the chamber, closing the door quietly behind him. He wore formal royal attire of midnight blue and silver, the crown of Vernaris resting not on his head, but in his hands. At 41, he carried the weight of kingship with easy confidence, the silver threads at his temples only adding to his distinguished appearance. "You're early," Elenya noted, crossing to meet him. "The festival doesn't begin for hours yet." "I couldn't wait," he admitted, setting the crown carefully on a nearby table before taking her hands in his. "You look breathtaking." "As do you," she replied softly, "though I'm surprised to find you without your usual retinue of advisors on such an important day." Cale's smile held a hint of mischief rare in a sovereign. "I may have deliberately misled them about my whereabouts. Some moments should be private, even for kings." His thumbs traced gentle circles against her palms, a gesture that had become habitual between them, a small intimacy that grounded their connection regardless of formal surroundings. Elenya felt the slight tremor in his touch, revealing nerves that his composed expression concealed. "You're anxious," she observed with gentle surprise. "After addressing thousands of subjects and negotiating with hostile kingdoms, tonight's announcement makes you nervous?" "Incredibly so," Cale confessed with disarming honesty. "Matters of the heart have always felt more consequential than matters of state." Elenya squeezed his hands reassuringly. "The court has had months to adjust to our relationship. Chancellor Aldrich assures me the response to the announcement will be overwhelmingly positive." "It's not the court's reaction that concerns me," Kyle admitted, his gaze holding hers steadily. "It's ensuring that you are certain, truly certain, about the path before us." The vulnerability in his voice touched her deeply. This powerful king who commanded armies and governed a prosperous realm stood before her concerned not about politics or diplomatic ramifications, but about her happiness and certainty. "Kyle," she began softly, "when you found me in that desert, I had nothing, not even the expectation of survival. Everything since has been unexpected gift." Her hand rose to touch his cheek. "But I've never been more certain of anything than I am of this choice, this path, this future with you." Relief softened his features, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing. "Even knowing the additional scrutiny you'll face? The expectations of a royal consort go far beyond those of an advocate, however respected." "I'm well aware," Elenya assured him. "Lady Isolde and I have discussed the responsibilities at length. I have no illusions about the challenges ahead." Cale nodded, appreciating her practical approach even to matters of the heart. It was one of countless qualities that had drawn him to her, this blend of emotional depth and clear-eyed realism, so different from the courtly artifice he had navigated his entire life. Chancellor Aldrich brought news from Raventhal, Elenya added, knowing Cale would want to hear this development. Thorian's exile is confirmed, permanent and complete. A shadow crossed Kyle's face at the mention of the man who had nearly taken Elenya's life. Good, though no punishment seems adequate for what he attempted. Justice isn't about adequate punishment, Elenya reminded him gently. It's about restoration of balance. For victims, for society, for the future. His power to harm others has been removed. That's what matters now. Her perspective, shaped by both personal experience and her work as advocate, never failed to provide clarity that complemented his royal viewpoint. Where many rulers surrounded themselves with those who merely echoed their own thoughts, Cale had found in Elenya a partner who offered different wisdom without undermining his authority. You've changed how I see justice, he acknowledged, how I see many things. As you've changed me, she replied. From the moment you carried me from those sands, you've shown me possibilities I never imagined for myself. The mention of their extraordinary beginning brought matching smiles to their faces. Though painful, that desperate meeting in the desert had forged a connection unlike any other, tempered in shared danger, strengthened through recovery, and deepened through mutual respect. I have something for you, Kyle said, reaching into his tunic to withdraw a small velvet pouch, a tradition in Vernaris, though not a requirement by any means. Elenya accepted the pouch, its weight substantial in her palm. Opening it carefully, she gasped at what emerged, a ring unlike any she had seen before. Rather than ostentatious gemstones, it featured intricate silver knotwork surrounding a single deep blue stone that seemed to capture light and transform it into something more profound. It's beautiful, she breathed, studying the craftsmanship. It belonged to my grandmother, Cale explained, the woman who served as regent and established many of the traditions that shaped Vernaris's approach to women's voices in governance. He paused, watching her reaction carefully. She wore it not as a symbol of belonging to someone else, but as a reminder of her own authority and wisdom. The significance of this choice, not a typical betrothal ring, but one that honored independent strength, touched Elenya deeply. In Raventhal, Thorian had presented her with a massive ruby that had felt more like a mark of ownership than partnership. This means more to me than I can express, she said softly. That you would connect me to her legacy. You share her spirit, Cale replied. Her conviction that justice and compassion are not opposed but complementary. Her belief that true strength lies in elevating others rather than dominating them. He took the ring gently from her palm but did not immediately place it on her finger. Instead, he held it between them, his expression solemn, despite the joy in his eyes. This ring comes with no obligation, Elenya. If you choose to wear it tonight as we announce our intentions to the court, I would be honored. If you prefer to wait, or to forego this tradition entirely, that too is your choice. The freedom he consistently offered, to choose her own path, to set her own boundaries, to maintain her independence even as they joined their lives, remained the foundation of their relationship. Where Thorian had demanded and controlled, Cale invited and respected. I would be proud to wear it, Elenya decided, extending her hand. Not as symbol of possession, but of partnership. As Cale slipped the ring onto her finger, its perfect fit seemed another small confirmation of rightness. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles with a reverence that made her heart swell. In a few hours we'll stand before the court and announce our betrothal, he said, his voice low with emotion. But in this moment it's just us, Elenya and Cale, making our own choice regardless of crowns or titles. As it has been from the beginning, she reminded him. Even when I didn't know you were king, I knew the kind of man you were. Honorable, compassionate, willing to risk yourself for a stranger in need. And I knew your strength long before I understood the full measure of your intelligence and wisdom, he countered. The way you fought to live, to recover, to find justice rather than vengeance. Their foreheads touched, a moment of quiet connection before the public celebration to come. Tonight, Vernaris would rejoice not only in midwinter traditions, but in the announcement that their widowed king had found love again, with a woman who had proven her worth to the kingdom through dedicated service. There will be talk of political advantages, Elenya noted pragmatically. Alliances with Highcrest, consolidation of border regions. Undoubtedly, Kyle agreed with a wry smile. The court always seeks political explanations for personal choices. Let them talk. We know the truth of how we came to be standing here. The truth, a journey from desert abandonment to royal partnership that no diplomatic strategy could have engineered. A connection formed through survival, strengthened through shared purpose, and culminating in a love neither had expected to find. As afternoon light began to fade outside the windows, they knew their private moment must end. Soon royal duties would reclaim Kale, and Elenya would need to complete her preparations for the evening's festivities. But for these precious minutes, they were simply a man and woman standing on the threshold of a shared future. One built not on rescue and gratitude, but on mutual respect and genuine love. "I should return before my absence is noted," Kyle said reluctantly, retrieving his crown from the table. "Chancellor Aldrich has only so much patience for my disappearances, even on festival days." Elenya smiled, helping him settle the crown properly upon his head, a gesture of partnership that symbolized her acceptance of both the man and his responsibilities. "I'll meet you in the royal antechamber before the festival begins." As he turned to leave, Kale paused at the door, his expression suddenly thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might be if I hadn't chosen to travel through that particular stretch of desert that day?" "Sometimes," Elenya admitted. "But then I remember something my father once told me. That true destiny isn't a single predetermined path, but the result of choices made with courage and integrity." Her fingers touched the ring he had given her. "You chose to save a stranger. I chose to fight for survival. Together, we chose to build something neither of us expected to find." "Choices," Kale repeated, a smile warming his features. "I like that better than fate." "As do I," Elenya agreed. "It honors the will and heart we've both invested in this journey." With a final shared look that communicated more than words could express, Kale departed to resume his royal duties. Elenya returned to the window, watching snowflakes dance against the darkening sky. Soon, the midwinter festival would begin, with its traditions of light conquering darkness, hope emerging from the year's deepest night. A fitting backdrop, she thought, for announcing a future built from what had once seemed her end. The desert that should have claimed her life had instead become the beginning of an unexpected journey. From abandoned wife to respected advocate, from dying stranger to beloved partner of a king who saw her true worth. As she touched the advocate's pin at her collar and the grandmother's ring on her finger, dual symbols of her independent strength and chosen connection, Elenya felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun in desperate survival had transformed into something neither she nor Kale could have imagined that day beneath the merciless sun. Tonight they would step into their future together, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals who had found in each other something worth fighting for, worth building upon, worth celebrating before their kingdom and beyond. And in that balance of independence and connection, both had discovered what true partnership could be, not possession or dependence, but mutual strength, shared purpose, and enduring love.